Thank you very much. And I want to commence today's program by thanking the United Synagogue, in particular Rabbi Michael Leitner, Richard Verber and David Nielsen, for making it possible for us to share these Kinnot with the wider community as well. And I think throughout the day, the United Synagogue has a very meaningful and inspirational program planned so that people can study and learn and really feel what Tisha B'Av is all about. During the course of the next couple of hours, we're going to be studying some of the Kinnot and some of the themes associated with Tisha B'Av. Certainly, Rav Soloveitchik explained that one of the key concepts to do with Tisha B'Av is a notion of really understanding what the Avelut is about. Why is it that we're going through these actions of mourning and Avelut? What is it we're supposed to be thinking about? Indeed, why is it that we say Kinnot after the service in the morning on Tisha B'Av? Rav Soloveitchik explained that in actual fact the Kinnot are what he called a kiyum, a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Avelut on Tisha B'Av. Otherwise, if we didn't say the Kinnot, we'd simply go through a few actions, we'd sit on the floor for davening, and that would be it. And we wouldn't really appreciate what we're like today is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. There are some study packs which are available on the United Synagogue website, www.theus.tv/Kinnot, and people can download that to be able to follow along as we're. The order of the Kinnot that we're going to be saying is also available in PDF form on that website for the benefit of people who don't have their own books of Kinnot. So I also want to mention at the outset the inspiration for this Tisha B'Av program. Really, it was Rav Soloveitchik who 30, 40 years ago innovated the notion of studying the Kinnot properly and thinking in depth about the themes of the day. Perhaps in earlier generations, people were able to understand the words of the Kinnot and understand the themes much more clearly than we're able to. But he really turned it into a day of studying the Avelut Yishana, the ancient mourning that we have here, even though there's a prohibition against Talmud Torah, prohibition against studying Torah on Tisha B'Av. Nevertheless, it is permitted to study Dvarim Hara'im, to study the things which deal with Jewish tragedies throughout the ages. And we do that so that we have a keener understanding and a keener appreciation of what Tisha B'Av is all about. In more recent years, Rabbi J.J. Schachter of Yeshiva University has had lengthy webcasts on Tisha B'Av which deal with themes of the day, and I've found much inspiration from listening to them over the years. And my own late father, Alav HaShalom, always studied the Kinnot himself, and indeed he looked after his passing in his Kinnot book and found notes that he'd made over the course of the years on the various Kinnot and themes and the passages in the Gemara dealing with the Churban Habayit, and that also inspired me to take the study of the Kinnot very, very seriously, really to enhance my appreciation of the day. During the course of the morning, I want to read together with you a number of Kinnot and also study a number of themes. We're going to be studying this morning 6 themes. We're going to be looking at the Isur She'elat Shalom. I always start on Tisha B'Av morning with a short shiur on themes to do with Avelut and the morning of Tisha B'Av. We're going to be looking today at the prohibition against extending greetings to friends and acquaintances on Tisha B'Av. We'll also consider the question of why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed and the notion and concept of sinat chinam, of causeless hatred. We'll be studying and learning about the martyrdom of Rabbi Chutzpit, the Maturgaman, the translator, who was one of the Asara Harugei Malchut, one of the 10 martyrs who was killed by the Romans. That's for studying and teaching Torah. We'll be considering the beauty of Eretz Yisrael. We'll be having a historical discourse about the blood libels, and we'll also be remembering the Kilot HaKodesh Shemasru Nafsham, the Kinnot HaKodesh, the holy congregations that were destroyed during the time of the Shoah, and mourning them as well. That's probably at about 10:30. We'll take a short comfort break for a few minutes and then resume. So I want to start today with the question of She'ilat Shalom, the prohibition against greeting people on Tisha B'Av. On page 3 of the handout, we have the first source is from the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim, Siman Taf Kuf Nun Daled Seif Kaf, which reads as follows: Ein She'ilat Shalom L'Chaveiro B'Tisha B'Av. One's not allowed to greet a friend or acquaintance on Tisha B'Av. V'hedyotot she'inam yodim v'notim shalom. And people who are unlearned and they greet you mistakenly. You come into shul and they say, "Hi, nice to see you," whatever it is. Then meshivim lahem b'safar rafa. Then we respond to them b'safar rafa. That's in a somber tone, with a koved rosh and with a sense of seriousness about us. We don't return their greeting warmly, but instead of lovely to see you, we have a good morning. That's polite and quiet. That's the chief rabbi that's on Sunday as part of the Vayichan program, spoke about the prohibition against She'ilat Shalom, against extending greetings on Tisha B'Av, and made the observation, and this really was the theme of his shiur, made the observation that by having something absent, we come to appreciate it more. We come to appreciate its value. That's often we take greeting people as just a matter of course. That we see somebody, we either nod at them or we don't nod at them. So we don't take it overly seriously. But when today we have to consciously abstain from greeting other people, then we realize that how valuable a greeting to others is. So how is it that we know that on Tisha B'Av, and indeed for an Avel, for a mourner, that She'ilat Shalom is prohibited? That the prohibitions of Tisha B'Av are in general learnt out from the prohibitions of Avelut. We find that the things that an Avel is not allowed to do, the Gemara tells us, are also prohibited on Tisha B'Av. She'ilat Shalom is prohibited to an Avel, so it's also prohibited on Tisha B'Av. So let's begin with the question of how do we know that She'ilat Shalom is prohibited to an Avel? So the Gemara in Masechet Moed Katan tells us that Avel asur b'She'ilat Shalom, that a mourner is not allowed to greet anybody. Because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Yechezkel, when the prophet Ezekiel was mourning for his wife, that he was told to be silent. This is if you like, a characteristic of an Avel, a characteristic of a mourner, is that they're unable to say anything. They can't express their emotions clearly, and they simply withdraw from engagement with society. Greeting other people is a form of engagement with society, and one of the characteristics of Avelut is that we don't engage with those who are around us. In actual fact, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch explains that many of the practices of Avelut are there to demonstrate and illustrate how it is that we're not interested in the rest of society, and we've retreated perhaps into just an awareness of ourselves and withdrawal from everybody else. That's why the Avel doesn't take any interest in his personal appearance. He's not allowed to shave, not allowed to cut his hair, not allowed to wash himself. That's why an Avel has an Isi Yitzia Mipetach Beito, that an Avel, if a person's sitting Shiva, he or she is not allowed to go out the house because they're not integrating in any sense with society. And the Isur She'ilat Shalom reflects that as well. So there are a number of dinim, a number of applications for this Isur She'ilat Shalom. And let's look at the Gemara in the third perek of Moed Katan. Perek Elu Megalchin is one of those chapters that we're allowed to study on Tisha B'Av. And the Breita there in Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet says as follows: Tanu Rabbanan. So the rabbis taught, Avel Shlosha Yamim Harishonim Asu B'She'ilat Shalom. That for the first 3 days of mourning, the first 3 days of Shiva, an Avel is not allowed to greet people. Mishlosha Va'ad Shiva, from the 3rd day until the end of Shiva, Meishiv V'Eino Shoel. So if a person extends a greeting to him or her, he can or she can respond, but they can't initiate a greeting. Bikan Va'ilach, but from that time onwards, so after Shiva, Shoelu Meishiv Kedarko, then an Avel is allowed to extend and respond to greetings in the normal way. So the Gemara says, Shlosha Yamim Harishonim Asu B'She'ilat Shalom. Is it really true that an Avel is not allowed to engage in She'ilat Shalom for the first 3 days? For Hatanya, but we've got a brighter which indicates differently. The brighter says, Rabbi Akiva. It happens that Rabbi Akiva's children died. Nichnasu kol Yisrael v'hispitum hesped gadol. And everybody came and there was a great eulogy for them. And a great memorial service straight after they died. B'shap tiratan, and when everybody was ready to leave, Amad Rabbi Akiva Sasal Gadol v'Amar. Rabbi Akiva stood up on a bench and he said, Achenu Beit Yisrael Shimu. My brothers, house of Israel, listen. Afilu Shnei Batanim Chatanim. Even though my 2 sons are great people, Menucham Hu Bishvil Kavod Shasitem. I feel comforted because of the kavod that you've given to them. Very often a mourner, when they look around at the Shiva, at the Levaya, and they see the number of people who've come to pay tribute to the person they're mourning, they feel comforted by the fact that so many people feel sorry for them in this way. And during the course of the past few months, when Levayas and Shivas have been very much contracted in terms of the number of people who are able to participate, I think this is something that people have lost out on very, very significantly, and they haven't had that support and that sense of consolation from knowing that people are there with them. On the other hand, I have heard people say that in actual fact, the concept of a Zoom Shiva has actually brought in a much wider circle of people, and even people abroad who wouldn't normally have been able to share their condolences in a semi-personal way have been able to. And if you came because of me, then Hare Kama Akiva Bashuk. There are quite a lot of people like me around. You know, I'm nobody special. This was Rabbi Akiva. Of course, he was special, but he was very humble and modest and said that he didn't feel that he was anybody special. And clearly what you said was, that's the reason why we think that Rabbi Akiva maybe is somewhat special, is because he's absorbed the Torah of Hashem. And therefore your reward, you've comforted me and you've mourned my sons, so your reward should be double. So go home, l'shalom. Go home in peace. So what we see here is that Rabbi Akiva did extend greetings to others. So we just said that at the beginning of the Breita, that an Avel is not allowed to extend greetings for the first 3 days. And we see that Rabbi Akiva that said, l'chulu v'ateichem l'shalom, first night Shiva, house was packed, and at 9 o'clock, he stood up on a chair and said, l'chulu v'ateichem l'shalom, go home in peace. So how can that be? So we answer, kavod rabim sha'ani, that this is something which is kavod rabim. This is something which reflects kavod, respect and dignity and honor for the community, and therefore that's permissible. As an aside, I often find when I go to a Shiva house that I speak with the Avelim, I maybe lead the service, I say a few words, and afterwards very often the Avelim say to me, I know I shouldn't say this, but I want to say thank you. So I'm not sure where it comes from, this notion that you shouldn't say this. I think an Avel can say thank you. What we have here is a prohibition against She'ilat Shalom, against extending a greeting, we're going to discuss in a little bit about what it means exactly, She'ilat Shalom, what type of greeting we're talking about. But it seems to be to do with saying Shalom. Saying thank you, that is certainly, I think, permissible. that politeness is always allowed. I don't think we ever have a halakha that one mustn't be polite. And in any event, we see a notion here, that model here, that Rabbi Akiva extended even Sheilat Shalom to others out of a sense of dignity, politeness. And therefore, I think certainly that to say thank you to people who've helped you at a Shiva is permissible. So we say Kavod Rabim Sha'ani. In any event, that giving respect to the tzibur, to the community, that's going to override the prohibition of Sheilat Shalom. Mishloshad Shiva Meshiva Inoshoel. So we said during the first 3 days, an Avel isn't allowed to engage in Sheilat Shalom whatsoever. After the first 3 days, Meshiva Inoshoel. So a person doesn't know that they're not supposed to greet the Avel, then the Avel is allowed to respond but not initiate a greeting. So the Avel sitting Shiva, and somebody comes in and says, "Oh, hello, Sadie, so nice to see you." So Sadie is allowed to respond, "That's thank you, also nice to see you." But they're not allowed, when the person coming in to greet them or to visit them, they're not allowed to say, "That's Shulamis," or whatever your name is, "lovely to see you." Mikan va'elach, but after the Shiva, sho'elu meshiv kedarko. They can extend and respond to greetings in the normal way. Or a minhu, but the Gemara says, we've got a contradiction. Hamotzer chaveiro avel, a person who encounters a friend who is in avilut, b'toch shloshim yom, during Shloshim, during the first 30 days, v'daberi motanchumin ve'ino shel bishlamo. You speak in you offer words of comfort, but you don't extend greetings. La'achar shloshim yom, and it's only after Shloshim she'ol bishlomo ve'ino medaberi motanchumin, that you flip the coin round, and that after Shloshim you extend greetings and you don't extend condolences. Meita ishtov v'nasai shacheret. And if a person's lost his wife and he's remarried, this is a topic for another time and a sugya elsewhere. But the question of when can an avel remarry or get married, and in actual fact we find under certain circumstances that an avel is even allowed to get married straight after the Shiva. So what if a person loses his wife and remarries immediately after the Shiva? So he's still within the Shloshim. Meita ishtov v'nasai shacheret. Eino rashai likanes leveito ledaber imo tanchumin. You can't go into his home and extend condolences. Remember, it's during the Shloshim. You maybe haven't had a chance to extend condolences during the Shiva, so you want to go and extend condolences. It's not polite. His new wife is sitting there, to go in and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry about the loss of your wife." You might be wondering, why is it that, how could it be that the person will be getting remarried, 7 days, 8 days after the loss of his wife? Isn't this very insensitive? In our context, of course, it is insensitive, but perhaps in a more ancient context, maybe not. Perhaps the person's wife had been very, very ill for a very long time, and perhaps he's got young children who need caring for. Perhaps he's marrying a sister-in-law or a cousin who knows the children well. He just needs to create some stability in his home life. In any event, you've got to have some sensitivity. Don't walk into the person's house and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that your wife died," when the new wife is sitting there. However, if you bump into the person somewhere else, then you can extend condolences in a somber manner. So what we're seeing here is that the prohibition for Sheilat Shalom lasts for longer than just 7 days, but extends for the entire Shloshim Yom. So Amar Ravidi Baravin. So Ravidi Baravin explained as follows: Hu shoel b'shlom acherim, she'acherim shruyim b'shalom. As far as initiating greetings is concerned, the Avel is allowed to extend greetings to others immediately after Shiva, because other people are shruyim b'shalom. Other people feel happy. They're in a peaceful frame of mind. And therefore, it's not inappropriate for him to extend greetings. However, other people aren't allowed to extend greetings to an Avel for the entire Shloshim, because the Avel isn't, in a sense, a state of shalom. For the entire Shloshim, the Avel is disturbed and miserable and unhappy. But the Gemara says, so hold on a minute. If we're saying that during Shloshim, the Avel can respond to greetings, then obviously somebody's greeted him or her. That's you don't respond to a greeting if nobody's extended a greeting to you. So how can it be that the Avel is responding to greetings if it's prohibited to extend a greeting? So the Gemara answers, D'lo yadei. Must be that the person extending the greeting either didn't know that the person's an Avel or didn't know that you're not allowed to greet an Avel. They think you've got to go into a Shiva house and be nice to the Avel, so they go in and they say, "Oh, Shalom Aleichem." They want to be nice to the Avel. They want to extend condolences and a blessing. So in that case, the Avel can respond. Ihachi hatam nami. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, then we should allow it even during the first 3 days. So we answer hatam modalahu. During the first 3 days, the Avel has to let them know that it's prohibited. V'lo ma'adelahu doesn't respond. Hacha, but beyond the first 3 days, lo tzarich lo duinu. Then he doesn't need to let them know that it's against the din to extend greetings. So then again, the Gemara says, or minhu, we've still got another contradiction. Hamotzeh chaveiro Avel. If you find somebody else, you bump into a friend in Avilut, this prohibition against Sheilat Shalom extends actually for the whole 12 months of Avilut, not just for 30 days. And during those 12 months, you extend condolences rather than Sheilat Shalom. But after the 12 months, then you extend greetings rather than condolences. But you can make a reference to the person's avilut. If you haven't seen them during the 12 months, you don't say a full hamakom yinachem etchem. And I'm really, really sorry to hear about your loss, and it must be very painful for you. But you say in a more casual way, that I haven't seen you for the past year, but I did hear your father passed away. Very sorry to hear it. Something like that. Amar Rabbi Meir, and parenthetically, Rabbi Meir says a person who extends condolences to a person after 12 months, the mahu domer, what might we compare it to? To a person who breaks their leg and then it's healed. And then a doctor says to him, "Hey, halachic, come to me. I can break your leg and reset it. So that you know that I'm also a good doctor. I've got good plaster casts." It's meaning that after 12 months, a person has more or less come to terms with their avilut. They've moved on to the next stage of life. They might still miss the person that they've lost, but not in the intense way that one does during the 12 months of mourning. In any event, what Rabbi Meir is, what this Bright is telling us is that the Issa Sheilat Shalom extends for the whole 12 months of Avilut, not just for 30 days. So we started off by saying that the prohibition applies for 7 days, then we moved on to say it applies for 30 days. Now we're saying actually it applies for 12 months. So how are we going to square that? How are we going to reconcile it? So the Gemara says, Lo kasha, it's not a problem. Haba vivimo habsha krovim. In one case, we're talking about mourning for parents, and the other for other relatives. The avilut for parents extends for a full 12 months. For other relatives, there's only a notion of shloshim, only a notion of mourning for 30 days. After 30 days, if a person loses a sibling or a spouse or a child, they might well feel sad for much longer than 30 days, but the formal rules of avilut only apply for 30 days. However, the loss of a parent is much more significant halachically, and the prohibitions of avilut apply many of them, at least, or a number of them apply for a full 12 months. So therefore, we say that for the 12 months, there's a prohibition against the Shelat Shalom. So Hatam Nami Daberim or Tanchumim min Hatzad. So if that's the case, then for other relatives also, that after 30 days, any tanchumin, any condolences that we express should be more muted and a little bit concealed. So we say in Hakinami, that's true. And for other relatives, you can extend to relatives in a more oblique fashion. So what we find here is, to summarize, during the first 3 days of Shiva, that an Avel is not allowed to, you're not allowed to greet an Avel, nor is the Avel allowed to respond to any greetings. And if greetings are extended to him, he shouldn't respond. During the rest of the Shiva, it's still prohibited to extend greetings to an Avel, but the Avel can respond if a person doesn't realize and extends greetings to him or her. That's beyond the Shiva. An Avel is allowed to extend greetings to others, but they're not allowed to greet him or her, but the Avel can respond. And then after the Shloshim, there's no prohibitions whatsoever if one's mourning people other than parents. But for parents, the prohibition against extending a greeting to an Avel applies to the entire Yud Beit Chodesh, extends for the entire first year of mourning. So one thing that people sometimes don't realize is that actually saying, we'll discuss in a moment what is included in this Shelat Shalom, but certainly saying Shalom Aleichem to a person is prohibited under these rubrics. So therefore, you see a person who's in Avilut, you haven't seen them for a while. Maybe you have a person who lives in Israel, they come back to England for a stone setting or something like that. That's 6, 8, 10 months into the Avilut. You see them in shul, haven't seen them for a long time. Usually you say to them, Shalom Aleichem. That's in this instance, you'd need to say a different greeting. Bruchim habayim. That's welcome. Nice to see you. But Shalom Aleichem is certainly going to be prohibited. So the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredeya, that's Simon Shin Pei Hey, Sif Aleph, summarizes these halakhot as I've just said them. But the Ramah adds in one or two further details which are of interest to us. So the Ramah says, quoting from the Rambam, and I've underlined it, the Ramah says, seeing as it's prohibited to extend greetings to an Avel, so certainly you're not allowed to speak at length. An Avel isn't allowed to engage in extensive conversations, because this whole, when we're now reflecting what the mindset is of the Issa Shelat Shalom, what the motivation is for this prohibition. And the motivation is, at least in part, that one should have a sense of a certain withdrawal from society. And obviously, if you're sitting Shiva and you're chatting to people for hours and hours, so then you've engaged with society rather than withdrawn from society. This is a challenge that we often have when sitting Shiva. Lots of people come to extend condolences. Very often it's people you haven't seen for a very, very long time. And you want to engage with them, you want to talk to them. But in actual fact, that's contradictory to the ruling here in the Shulchan Aruch, and one should try and limit discourse somewhat. So really what it means is, you can talk about the nifta, you can talk about the person who's passed away. That's meritorious, and that's really what Shiva is all about. People come in and share memories of the person that you're mourning with them. If they knew the person, ask them to share memories that they have. If they didn't know the person, then share your memories with them. That can be something which is very, very meaningful. But to talk about the cruise that you've just been on, or ask them about their summer holidays, or all the Gam to Mishpacha, or something like that, is not entirely appropriate. So that's an important observation about the halakhot of Avelut and also about Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av also, there should be limited conversation. We shouldn't be chatting with people about all sorts of things under the sun. Then the Rama says, importantly, nowadays, some people are lenient about extending greetings to an Avel after Shloshim. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So the Rama says it doesn't really make sense to say that after Shloshim we can be lenient and extend greetings to people, because the Gemara makes no such distinction. And in actual fact, the Gemara says that very clearly that the prohibition against Sheilat Shalom extends for the full 12 months. So the Rama says, unless we say that what we call Sheilat Shalom isn't classical Sheilat Shalom. So he's referring us to halacha in Orach Chaim, which deals with halakhot tefillah, and tells us that on a regular day, a person's not allowed to say Shalom Aleichem. Sheilat Shalom is prohibited. That's before davening. The first person, as it were, not person, but the first being that we extend greetings to in the morning should be HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not our friends. And there's some discussion, what exactly do we mean by Sheilat Shalom? But in any event, it seems, and on the next page I've got the Avnei Nezer, who discusses this as well. That's what it boils down to. Is it seems that saying Shalom, using the name of Hashem, Shalom is one of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, using the term Shalom when you greet a person is very, very significant. It's bestowing a bracha on them, a bracha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless them with all sorts of peace. And that's inappropriate before we daven. The first thing that we should be doing in the morning is davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for our most basic needs. And then we go on to bless other people. And likewise with Avelim. It's a person who's in Avelut. It's not appropriate to say to them, Shalom. That's, you should be blessed with tranquility and inner peace. That's not where the Avel is at this point in time. And therefore, that's what's prohibited. But saying hello or good morning to an Avel is not prohibited. And nevertheless, that's the Magen Avraham in Hilchot Tisha B'Av, and this is quoted also by the Mishnah Berurah, they say that on Tisha B'Av you shouldn't even say good morning to a person. So you should have no engagement of that nature whatsoever. And what it seems that we say in practice then is that during Shiva, that you shouldn't greet an Avel in any form. You shouldn't say hello to them or anything like that. But after Shiva, or certainly after Shloshim, we can be lenient and we can say hello or good morning to them, because that's not classic Sheilat Shalom. And the only thing which is prohibited for all that time is classical Sheilat Shalom. So saying Shalom Aleichem to them, or I guess if you're in Israel and you speak in the vernacular, so saying Shalom, that would be prohibited. Sefer Gesher Chaim, I brought it on page 4, is a classic work on Hilchot Avelut, and he makes the observation that he brings down what I've just said about saying good morning, etc., etc. So it goes on to say that, interestingly, saying Mazel Tov to an Avel is permitted. Sometimes it happens that you go to a Shiva and the Avel, their child of theirs has just got engaged, or they've just had a grandchild or something like that. You want to wish them Mazel Tov. Or perhaps they were ill. You want to wish them a refuah shlema. So it seems that's permitted. It's a bit incongruous sometimes to say to an Avel both Hamaka Minachem, I extend my condolences, as well as Mazel Tov. But nevertheless, saying Mazel Tov doesn't fall into the category of Issa Sheilat Shalom, and therefore it's permissible. So also sometimes, you have with the Avel, somebody very often, they'll get phone calls That's people who can't come into the Shiva, they'll phone. And certainly that's, the moment when Shivas are compacted and you can't have so many people come to the Shiva. So a lot of people will visit on Zoom or by phone. The other will pick up the phone. So there's an Issa Sheila Shalom. Is the Avel allowed to say hello when they answer the phone? So I think they probably are. In terms of saying hello is just on the phone. And perhaps this is one of the things that Rabbi Mervis was referring to. Unfortunately, though, saying hello when you answer the phone, that you're not really blessing the person. You're just sort of acknowledging that you're there. Maybe it would be better to pick up the phone and say, Chaim Cohen on the line or something like that to identify yourself. But I don't think you need to be rude and just pick up the phone and say yes. That's a little bit rude to the people at the other end. I think you can say hello. If not, just identify yourself. I want to conclude this first share with a Mishnah at the end of the first parak of Masechet Tanit, which I think sums up for us what Issa Sheila Shalom is about on Tisha B'Av. So the Mishnayot in Masechet Tanit, certainly the first two prakim, deal with Taniot, fast days that they used to have in Israel in antiquity when there was a drought. If there wasn't rain, then this was a very serious matter. And remember, they didn't have reservoirs and storage like they do now. I mean, even now in Eretz Yisrael, the rainfall is very, very important. But certainly in olden times, it was even more important. If there was a drought, they would fast. And there was a whole series of 13 fasts that they would go through on Mondays and Thursdays for a number of weeks. And then what happened if they got to the end of that series of fasts and there was still no rain? So these fast days had been and gone, and they still hadn't been answered. So then that total sense of Avelut takes over the people, and there's a reduction in business. People don't trade more than absolutely necessary. You don't build things, nice houses, you don't plant gardens. You don't get engaged or married. All these things to express a sense of Avilut. And you also don't greet people. Because we want to feel, or they wanted to feel, like people who were distant, cast away by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has cast these people away. That's what it's all about, a sense of distance from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a sense of siluk shechina. And that is what we should be feeling on Tisha B'Av. She'ilat Shalom. Shalom is one of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one of the names of the Almighty. We don't use that on Tisha B'Av because Tisha B'Av is a day of galut, a day of exile, a day of siluk shechina, a day when we commemorate the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash wasn't simply a day when bricks and mortar were burnt, but it's a day when HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed his presence from the Jewish people. And that is what we're mourning on Tisha B'Av. That's what we should be feeling. And when we have this Issa She'ilat Shalom, when we refrain from greeting others, it's not just because we don't want to engage with society. It's not just because we're going through the motions of Avelut, but it's also because we feel very far away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that is an introductory shiur about halakhot Avelut and how they apply to Tisha B'Av. I want now to start with the Kinnot. I want us to begin with the first Kinnah as it appears in the Kinnot book, Shavat Suru Meni. This is on page 91 in the Rosenfeld edition, on page 152 in the Art Scroll, and on page 195 in the Koren. This is a Kinnah which was written by Rabbi Eliezer HaKaler, one of the most prolific Paitanim, liturgical composers in Jewish history. Nobody's quite sure exactly when the Kalir lived, whether he was a Tana, whether he lived at the end of the Amoraitic period in the 6th or 7th century, or whether he lived as late as the 10th century. And this Kinah that describes really the distance between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael, and expresses a sense of pain about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Shavat, that everything has ceased, that everything has stopped. You look out and the skies are quiet, the roads are quiet, nothing's going on, that everything has come to a standstill. Life in some ways has come to a standstill. Certainly religious life has come to a standstill. Almost like you think back to the beginning of lockdown. You went outside and you had almost an apocalyptic sense. It was an apocalypse. Everything had stopped. And that's what it must have been like after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Interestingly, we're starting really in the middle of a Kinah. This Kinah is a continuation of the Krovot, which some communities say in the repetition of the Amidah on Tisha B'Av. If you look in the Rosenfeld edition, the repetition of the Amidah has lots of extra insertions in each bracha, and those were composed by the Kalir to enhance even the Tefillah on Tisha B'Av. We tend not to say them, but we continue after the Amidah with this Kinah. For those who don't have Kinnot books, a PDF of the Kinah of the Kinnot is available on the United Synagogue website, www.theus.tv/Kinnot. You can download it. There together with the study pack. Shavat surumeni shmauni ochrai. Sechiu maos hesimuni bedrei chaverai. Sakot mishkan mischot diburai. Sakot avuvlugu giborai. Safku chafu madu aivarai. Kisila cholabirai. Nafla otenu betzol dechuya. Eini chikta lachazon ben berechya. Ad belei gilgal chavuya. Eini mo'olelet bivanit nuchuya. Asavni chavayikra labachya. V'nam al eile ani vochya. Al pnei furat nupetzu chasideha. Palgei suf sachra karu sodeha. Pachad chet shilo takaf sodeha. Patsu chazireya raye chasideha. Patsu maser vanidlinideha. Persation biadeha. Al hartzion sadushon emedanai. Safu aroshi zedonai. Samtu benov lamod zedonai. Sod natsar talo remedanai. Sa'aka mi bimei bendinai. Tzadiku Adonai. Ata kalim hifbadata met yermunei. Kerav tabo elai vayacharimune. Kolila shmia barav higrimune. Karati liosve givon gam heim zermune. Kumi afori batel herimune. Karati lam ahavai heimarimune. Lama ruach apenu la tevach shamaro. Ra'ita ki chetano roreinu chamaru. Ra'ita ki amal vachas bivuyach gamaru. Rafta biyad yichezkel ninkom kamomaru. Ra'e benachidei migoy amaru. Ra'e Adonai ki tzarle me'ai chamarmaru. Hashiveni sisu shima legoy tse'ane. Shivtam ramos chatzerai lahad kiane. Siftai Mashorai Tabir Damamur Lahad Biani Shamata Kizmorot Af Heichin Letatani Shachvu Venadu Chatzat Lahabriani Shamu Kine Nachaani Kitam Chakta Becheso Panecha Tashiv Lahem Gumul Kaz Chazot Panecha Tidof Samonio Ad Seiraut Sufunecha Titain lahav not at seifen inecha. Tikra l'shakaram kos kamus befinuyecha. Tavo chol ra'atam lefanecha. Tavo el tzar asher kilanu. Limvo chamat b'chema nihalnu. Ad lach v'chavor higlanu. Zakenu v'achor v'tula kavalanu. Ram habetna amcha chulanu. Zachor Adonai mehayalanu. So we concluded that Kinah with the words Zachor Hashem mehayalanu, asking Hashem to remember what has befallen us. Indeed, this is a concluding line from the final paragraph of Megillat Eicha. And that's how the refrain that we have in the next Kinah, the next Kinah, Eicha Atzta, on page 159 in the Art Scroll 217 in the Koren, page 93 in the Rosenfeld, is one of a number of Kinnot that we're going to be reading this morning, which is the compare and contrast mode. We're going to be comparing and contrasting HaKadosh Baruch Hu's anger with the Jewish people at the time of Churban HaBayit, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, with the love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has shown us at other times during the course of Jewish history. The first phrase in each verse is very upbeat, and then the second phrase is much more downbeat. The other way around. We start off with saying how angry HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us in the first phrase, and then in the second phrase, we say, you could have remembered these things that happened in the past. In the first line, we talk about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been so angry with us. That's Eicha Atzta Ba'apecha. How HaKadosh Baruch Hu got angry with his wrath, to wipe out through the Edomites, through the Romans, that's Amunecha, the people who believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't remember the covenant that he made with Avraham Avinu, that he was always going to look after the Jewish people. So we say to Hashem, Zachor Hashem mehayalanu. Hashem, please remember what has befallen us. Eicha stavabcha la'abed biyadazo mimamunecha v'lo zacharta brit bein b'tzarim asher beirata livchunecha v'v'chein bitinu Zachor Adonai mehayalanu. Eicha garta b'garadcha laglos biyad geim gulecha ולא זכרת דילוג דרך אשר דיברת להתגלך, וכן דיברנו, זכור אדוני מהיה לנו. איכה הגת בהגיונך להדוף ביד חוללים המונך, ולא זכרת ויתוק ויודבסת אשר בידת לבודך, וכן וקוננו, זכור אדוני מהיה לנו. Eicha zanachta b'zamcha lezalzel biyad zarim zvulecha v'lo zacharta chitun chukei chorei v'asher chakakta lechamulecha v'v'chein chivinu zachor Adonai mehayalanu. Eicha tarachta b'torchecha litrof biyad tmeim tzulaecha v'lo zacharta yikar yedidot yosher asher yichadata liyodecha v'chein yalalnu. Zachor Adonai mehayalanu. Eicha kivanta b'chazcha lechalot biyad koshlim karmecha lo zacharta lo yisnach l'olam asher imadta lilkuchecha v'chein lahagnu. Zachor Adonai mehayalanu. Eicha milalta b'mascha limchot biyad monim u'menasaecha v'lo zacharta nisiyat notzat nesher asher nasata linsuecha v'chein nahinu zachor Adonai mehayalanu. Eicha sakta b'sarcha l'sageh biyad seafim zahadecha lo zacharta osati yadayim asher tata lavadecha v'chein nahinu zachor Adonai mehayalanu. Eicha patzta b'fachtecha l'fageh biyad paritzim palaecha ולא זכרת צלת צבי צדק אשר צפנת לצבאך וכן צעקנו זכור אדוני מהיה לנו. איכה קראת בקריאתך להקנות ביד קמים קרואיך ולא זכרת רגש רכב ריבותיים אשר רצית לרעך וכן רגענו זכור אדוני מה היה לנו איך שאפת בשאפך לשלות ביד שוללים שלמך ולא זכרת תוקף צלצלי תואר אשר תיקנת לתמימך וכן טעננו זכור אדוני מה היה לנו טעננו לשפוך כמים על מה ביום זה נשפינו פעמיים זוכרי בהיותי יושבת בשלווה בירושלים רגנתי ואתה דעת חוג shamayim. Many of the Kinnot do begin with that word eicha, the opening words of the Megillah that we read last night. Because I'll discuss what exactly does the word eicha mean. One of the suggestions is eicha. How can it be that things have become like this for the Jewish people? That once upon a time the temple stood in all its glory, and now we sit lowly and miserable. That's these Kinnot, these first Kinnot were all composed by the Kalir, and you can see that one leads into another. The end of the first Kinnah that we said concludes with Zechor Hashem Mehaya Lanu, which was the refrain in the second Kinnah. This Kinnah that concludes with the words V'ata Adeh Chuk HaShamayim. Now we wish that we could soar up to heaven, and that's indeed how the next Kinnah begins, Adeh Chuk Shamayim. We're actually going to skip a few and move on to page 104. That's in the Rosenfeld edition, page 188 in the Art Scroll, and page 301 in the Koren. And this is again a sort of compare and contrast model. So we talk about ohali, my tent. That's literally an ohel is a tent. This is a reference to the Beit HaMikdash. That's the Beit HaMikdash, the precursor, if you like, of the Beit HaMikdash was the Mishkan, which was the Ohel Moed, which was a tent of meeting in the Midbar. So the Beit HaMikdash is referred to as ohali, as my tent. And we talk about that how HaKadosh Baruch Hu desired the Beit HaMikdash. Ad lo v'reishit, even before the world was created, part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's blueprint for creation was that there would be a Beit HaMikdash. And we ask him, Lama, why is it that the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed? And this is alternating verses. The first line of each verse that talks about the Beit HaMikdash, how important it is, that what opportunities it presented us with to engage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we ask Hashem, why has this been taken away from us? Why has this relationship been terminated? Ohali Ashev Ta'avta Shelover Azulov Reishit Im Kisei Kavod L'Tzarfo Lama Lanetzach Shudad Biad Shodadim V'niyeta Kroeb Otaya V'ra'ashta V'raganta V'ad Malifo Ohali Asher Komamta Leitanei Olam B'cher Da'at Mi'ifo Lama Lanetzach Shumat Biad Sarim V'niyeta Ketzipo Bozet Al Gag Mar Tzoreach Melodidifo Oholi Asher Patsa Lemano Letzir V'ata Modimadipo Lama Lanetzach Urar Biat Arelim V'niyeta Kesonei V'tzar V'ayei Ivui Moshavpo Oholi Asher Nachita Ba'ananei Hod Let Asher Yishno Fo V'einenu Po Lama lanetzach moas biad mordim v'niyeta kelo yuchal hoshia malachafo oholi asher konamta malchon l'shivtecha l'chofet b'chupo lama lanetzach yu'ab yad yihirim v'niyeta ketas bechalal vein od v'navi v'nyamta ha'impo oholi asher chanita me'as b'ta'av mipo Lama lanetzach sunach biad zayrem v'niyeta kevatik yoksei chutza v'lo afar po oholi asher ichanta lahashlich po lefanecha goral po Lama lanetzach tocha biad domem v'niyeta ger ba'aretz v'namta ki lo nasov ad po Ohali asher ba'avon bitzi chashku kuchok ve'nishpo. Lama nanetzach upal b'yad achirim niyeta korech b'malon v'od milachafo. Achor akadem mipo l'chol dovado noda kitzpo v'chupo. Al mer imikol om shat alai kapo. Zot levi alil kifit chakut b'chapo. Repeati v'tucha ki rega ba'po. Vata'ata eicha ya'if ba'po. We're going to go on in a moment to one of the most descriptive Kinnot about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the Kinnah Zuchor Asher Asar Tsar Bifnim, the Kinnah which is based on the Gemara Masechet Gittin, describing how Titus came into the Beit HaMikdash and right into the Holy of Holies and defiled the Kodesh Kodashim. We'll talk about how that happened in a few moments' time. That's in the Art Scroll on page 226. The Koren 361 and the Rosenfeld on page 111. But before we do that, I want to spend a little bit of time discussing and considering why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. That's descriptive Kinnah about what happened, but before we discuss what happened, let's consider a little bit why it happened. And a number of sources in Chazal address this question. I want to look at a famous Gemara in Masechet Yoma, that's in the first chapter of Masechet Yoma, which discusses gives one explanation of why the Batei Mikdash were destroyed. So the Gemara says, we're on page 5 in the handouts. The Gemara says, Mikdash Rishon Mipnei Macharev. Why was the first Beit HaMikdash destroyed? Mipnei Gimel Dvarim Shayu Bo. Primarily because of three sins which were rampant at that time. Avodah Zarah, idolatry, V'gilui Arayot, and sexual licentiousness, Ushfichut Damim, and murder. It seems like at the time of the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, every moral aspect of society had fallen apart. There was idolatry, there was sexual wantonness, and there was rampant murder, killing people. It's discussed exactly what it means by murder. Does it just mean that this was the center of gun crime, as it were, for the world? Or perhaps it means that just people were putting other people to death because they felt that these people were a harm to society, they didn't like a person. It wasn't just they were wantonly murdering people, but they were just going around killing people unnecessarily. That a person broke into your house, a person was rude to you, a person sat in your seat in shul, whatever it was, instead of dealing with the issue, you killed them instead. And the Gemara then goes on to bring proof texts for how we know that these three sins were wanton and rampant. These, of course, are the three cardinal sins. And then the Gemara says at the end of the passage, Mikdash Sheni, time of the second Beit HaMikdash, it was different. Shayu oskim Torah v'mitzvot gemilut chasadim. In actual fact, they were quite nice people. They were from. There are other sources which discuss to what degree that was true, but certainly this Gemara is saying that their religious integrity was intact. They were oskim b'Torah v'mitzvot. And they were nice to other people. They had a big Cholim society, they had welfare rotas, they had meal rotas, they did Shiva visits, they had Gemach loan funds, all these sorts of things. It was a good society. So they were religious and they were nice. Why was it destroyed? Because there was sinat chinam. There was causeless, baseless hatred. This teaches us that sinat chinam, baseless hatred, is as grievous as the three cardinal sins of avodah zarah, gilui arayot, ushfichut damim. Three cardinal sins of idolatry, sexual immorality, and bloodshed. So we're going to discuss in a few moments' time exactly what the definition is of sinat chinam, what motivates sinat chinam, what is sinat chinam, how we should understand this concept of causeless and baseless hatred. I want to bring to your attention a question asked by the Pnei Yehoshua, of Yehoshua folk. That's a Talmudist and halachist who lived in the 18th century, very well known for his commentary Pnei Yehoshua on Shas. And he raises the problem that the Gemara in Bava Metzia that says that in actual fact, the reason why Yerushalayim was destroyed in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash was because Shedanu Bodin Torah, because they applied Torah law. Now, it doesn't mean to say that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because they were observing the Torah. Observing the Torah is a good thing. Here we're talking about in civil cases where a person brought another person to Beit Din, and they followed the letter of the law. So we might well ask what's wrong with getting out Shulchan Aruch and finding out who's right and who's wrong and who owes who how much money. If a person has wronged me, or I believe a person has wronged me, that's what Shulchan Aruch is for. Let me take him to the Beit Din and let me find out, present the case to the Dayanim, and the Dayanim will look in Shulchan Aruch and see who's liable to how much, and they'll tell us what to do. Why is that such a terrible thing? So what it really means is there were other alternatives. There's always opportunities of lifnim mishurat hadin. There's always opportunities of some sort of pshara, some sort of compromise, because life isn't always so linear that he's the baddie and he's the goodie. It's sometimes a bit more complex. As I say in some contexts, there's three sides to every story: his, hers, and the truth. And the truth is often somewhere in the middle. So even with these cases, we should try to seek a peaceful balance, if not in the middle, but at least not right at either extreme. And very often there is that middle ground which could be achieved. It's recognizing that things aren't just absolutely clear-cut, but they didn't want to do that. In the times of the second Beit HaMikdash, they wanted to say, I am right and he or she is wrong. I am correct and that person is wicked. That's rather than saying that I'm 90% correct and that person is 10% correct, they weren't willing to do that. In any event, Pnei Yehoshua wants to know how these two texts can be reconciled. Here we're saying it's because of sinat chinam, and in the Gemara Bava Metzia we're saying it's because Torah, that they refuse to compromise. So he says, of course, the answer is that Tahaba Talia, that in actual fact the two are related to each other. Lama lo asu lifnim mishurat hadin. Why weren't they willing to reach some point of compromise? Mipnei sinat chinam. It's because of sinat chinam, because they hated each other. They couldn't see any way to reach some point of compromise. Everything was absolutely linear. That's I'm right and he's wrong. There's no point of compromise along the way. And that is what sinat chinam is. We're going to see that it's an inability to see the good in others. In any event, the Maharal of Prague in Netzach Yisrael addresses the question that, why is sinat chinam such a terrible thing? We understand that it goes against the Torah. Torah says, you shouldn't unnecessarily hate a person. But the Torah tells me that there are lots of things which are prohibited. It's prohibited to eat chazar treif. It's prohibited to carry on Shabbat if there's no Eruv. It's prohibited to speak Lashon Hara. It's lots of things are prohibited. Why specifically is the prohibition or the issue of sinat chinam so grievous that's why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed? How is it comparable in any way to the three cardinal sins which caused the downfall of the first Beit HaMikdash? How is sinat chinam comparable to those three cardinal sins? That's the question that the Maharal asks. How is it that the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of these three cardinal sins? The second Beit HaMikdash was only destroyed because of sinat chinam. That's because of baseless hatred. And if we skip a few lines to the underlined bit, the straightforward answer is as follows. There was something unique about the first Beit HaMikdash. In the terms of the first Beit HaMikdash, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was there. People could feel it when they went into the Beit HaMikdash. People were aware of it, that the Aaron was there in the Kodesh HaKodashim. There was an awareness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chvodo V'atzmo himself was present. V'zeu Malat Beit HaMikdash HaRishon. And this was the uniqueness and the superiority of the first Beit HaMikdash, Shayam Yuchad B'Mala, because it was exalted in such a way, that the Hashem's divine presence was there. Therefore, we understand that Beit HaMikdash was destroyed when it was no longer appropriate for the Shekhinah to reside there. Because the first Beit HaMikdash was primarily Machon L'Shivtecha. It was a place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reside. It was a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shekhinah. And if the Beit HaMikdash could no longer host HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if it could no longer tolerate HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu could no longer tolerate being there, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to leave. It was no longer a place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When they defiled the Beit HaMikdash, that then HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't dwell amongst them. Unless the sin was inadvertently. And in those instances, when people sin inadvertently, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu can remain with us. However, these three cardinal sins, Chazal tell us, cause spiritual defilement for the Jewish people. And the Maharal goes on to give various explanations. But the point that he's making is that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwelled in the first Beit HaMikdash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't dwell in a place which is defiled by Tumah. It's in conflict with the nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, when these three cardinal sins were rampant amongst the Jewish people, then the Jewish people were defiled spiritually, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu could no longer be amongst them in the Beit HaMikdash, and that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to withdraw. But skipping a bit in the Maharal, he says, Al Mikdash Sheni, the second Beit HaMikdash was different. Chazal tell us that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, actually wasn't there in the second Beit HaMikdash. The second Beit HaMikdash was a temple to Hashem, and it was in many senses grander than the first Beit HaMikdash, but nevertheless, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence wasn't there. It was like a gold purse with nothing in it. And that's the way how the second Beit HaMikdash was. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was, that's only half there. Therefore, these three sins weren't relevant to the second Beit HaMikdash. So what made the second Beit HaMikdash so great? Why is it so terrible that there's no Beit HaMikdash if HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shekhinah wasn't there in the way that it was present with the first Beit HaMikdash? What does it matter that there's no second Beit HaMikdash? What was the Maila? What was the uniqueness of the second Beit HaMikdash? The second Beit HaMikdash was unique in the sense that the Jewish people were there. This is clear. Yisrael heim hamitachdim al yedei Beit HaMikdash haya lahem kohen echad mizbeach echad v'nefru abamot shelo haya pirud v'chiluk b'Yisrael. What was special about the second Beit HaMikdash? The fact that it was a unifying force for the Jewish people. The whole Jewish people came to the Beit HaMikdash on the regalim, on the festival days, to offer up korbanot. There weren't bamot, there weren't private altars spread around the land. If you wanted to bring a korban, if you wanted to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you came to Yerushalayim. There was one Kohen. There wasn't a competing Kohen Gadol. There was one Mizbeach. It was a unifying force for the Jewish people. Maral says he'll explain that further on. So what does the Beit HaMikdash do? The second Beit HaMikdash turned the people into one nation. And that was why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed as a result of Sinat Chinam. What does Sinat Chinam do? Sinat Chinam fragments the people. Sinat Chinam splinters the people. We're no longer one unit. When you've got Sinat Chinam, you think about a community. Think about a community where there's Sinat Chinam in a community. It's a fragmented community. The Jewish people at the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, there was Sinat Chinam. People had causeless, baseless hatred for each other, and therefore they were mechulakim. And therefore there was no point in having a Beit HaMikdash. Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, was meant to unify the people, was meant to reflect the unity of Am Yisrael. If there was no unity, there was no point in having the Beit HaMikdash. It was a false symbol. Upeirush Pashutu. The Maharal says this is, just aleph base. This is straightforward. It's obvious that if the second Beit HaMikdash was about the unity of the Jewish people, if the Jewish people are a fragmented people, then it's not appropriate to have a Beit HaMikdash. And there's a lot to think about in our days, this notion of no Beit HaMikdash, because there's no unity. Beit HaMikdash represents the unity of the Jewish people. We all come together as one at the site of the Beit HaMikdash. If we don't feel like one community, if we still feel that there are divides between different groups in Am Yisrael, then we're not yet ready for the Beit HaMikdash. And indeed, it's very famous what Rav Kook said, that if the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, then the way that we have to address it is by Avat Chinam. If you look in what Rav Kook says in Orot HaKodesh, down towards the bottom of page 6 on the handout, Vim nechravnu nechrav ha'olam imanu al yidei Sinat Chinam. If the reason why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed was because of Sinat Chinam, Nashuv lihibanot, ha'olam imanu yibaneh, that's we will be rebuilt as a people, and the world will be rebuilt together with us, al yidei avat chinam, by practicing causeless love for others, unnecessary love for others, hayoredet merosh surim, which comes down from the tops of mountains. As a result, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have mercy and favor on us. That's that basically that's the best way that we can have HaKadosh Baruch Hu associated with all good. That is through Ahavat Chinam. And Rav Dessler, that also makes a similar point in Michtav Eliyahu. The Michtav Eliyahu. He says, Al Machav Yerushalayim, Al Sinat Chinam Ve'al Bitul Torah. V'Aperush Sinat Bitul Torah Heim Heim HaChurban. Says the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because people weren't learning Torah, and people hated each other. Ki HaChurban Hu HaChurban HaRuchani. Really, what's destroyed? It's true that the bricks and mortar of the Beit HaMikdash were destroyed, but the real destruction is in the hearts of the Jewish people. V'im Kein Mal Binyan Yerushalayim. So therefore, how are we going to rebuild Yerushalayim? Avat habriot v'limud haTorah. We'll rebuild Yerushalayim by loving each other and by limud Torah and by learning more Torah. That's how we go about it. The antidote or the opposite of Sinat Chinam is Avat Chinam. The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, because the Jewish people were Am Mefuradum Mefuzar, dispersed, intellectually, spiritually dispersed people and splintered people. The way we need to go about rebuilding is through building bridges, is by trying to unite ourselves. That's one of the beauties of Tisha B'Av in recent years. It won't be happening this year, I guess. But the past perhaps 10 years, one of the things that's happened at the Kotel at the end of Tisha B'Av is the Kumsitz. It's never used to happen 20, 30 years ago when I was in Yerushalayim for Tisha B'Av. There was no such thing as a Kumsitz at the end of Tisha B'Av. But in recent years, there's a Kumsitz. You can see it, you can find it on YouTube. If it's happening this year on Facebook, I guess, it'll be posted. But literally thousands of people singing together at the end of Tisha B'Av. So I'm not entirely comfortable with the notion of a kumsitz on Tisha B'Av. Even at the time of Nechama, at the end of Tisha B'Av, it's still day of mourning. Kumsitz is at the end of the wedding, you have a kumsitz, not on Tisha B'Av. But putting that personal discomfort with it to one side, there's a beauty to it as well. And I have to say, despite my own personal reticence about it, I think the beauty outweighs my own personal reticence. And what's the beauty of the kumsitz at the end of Tisha B'Av? The beauty is that everybody's there. That there aren't enough non-religious people there, and we'd love them to be there as well. But it spans the gamut of the religious community, all stripes and colours. And I want to be careful about saying it, spans the whole gamut from this group to that group, because already using language like that is itself, I think, perhaps a slight reference to Sinat Chinam, that we're at one end and you're at the other end, but we can still come together. No, we're all together, and that's part of the beauty of Tisha B'Av today. And we need to make sure that beauty continues not just on Tisha B'Av, but throughout the year. It's not just at the end of Tisha B'Av that it's Chaverim Kol Yisrael. It should be all the time that it's Chaverim Kol Yisrael, and that we don't notice the colours and stripes of different Jews, or even the religious affiliations or non-religious affiliations of different Jews. Rav Kook actually says, how can we, square this with the mitzvah that, or the fact that there is no mitzvah of loving a person who doesn't subscribe to mitzvah. V'havta l'reacha kamocha is the mitzvah. You should love your neighbor as yourself. And Chazal tell us l'reacha b'mitzvot. That applies to people who subscribe to mitzvot in the way that you do. Rav Kook says that only applies in a Beit Din sense. In terms of, there are certain, things which have to come to Beit Din, and if a person doesn't subscribe to mitzvot, then there's no need to be lenient on them in those regards. But in terms of the emotional bond that a person should have, there should be no difference between that one person and another. In any event, how do we achieve ahavat chinam? How can I just say, it's very easy to dislike people. How is it possible to like people? And certainly, not just like them, ahava, to love them. Look at what Rav Kook says at the top of page 7. When you look properly at the good aspects of every person, so then you really grow to love people. You don't need to be disingenuous about it at all. Because when you encounter the good side of a person, then it envelops and overwhelms the negative sides of a person. So the kisa kalon arum, it covers the shame of the nakedness. Meaning, what Rav Kook is saying is that if you look properly for the good in people, you'll be able to see that you'll be able to be attracted to that, you'll be able to engage in that. And if you're serious enough about it, then the good that a person does will supersede the bad that they do. And if you hate people, then focus more on their good midot than their bad midot, and you'll be able to see that the good certainly shines through, and that you can engage better with that. But the question is, what is sinat chinam? Or one of the questions is, what is sinat chinam? What do we mean by baseless, causeless hatred. So Rav Kook's philosophy seems to be that in actual fact, all hatred is unnecessary. And you only hate a person because you're not focusing enough on their good traits. That's whenever you hate a person, according to Rav Kook, that's sinat chinam. That's because you don't value their positive contributions. The Chafetz Chaim, that wasn't as extreme in his definition. He seemed to think that perhaps there are occasions when it's acceptable to hate a person. I guess if a person comes and kills your entire family and burns down your entire house and takes away your entire parnasa, chas v'shalom, then it's reasonable to hate them. That's if you've got the patience of Eov, then maybe you won't hate them. But anybody else, it's legitimate to hate them. There are circumstances when you can hate people. What the Chafetz Chaim does is he highlights a number of instances where it's where people tend to hate other people for illegitimate reasons. The Chafetz Chaim is best known for writing his Sefer Chafetz Chaim. His name wasn't the Chafetz Chaim, but he wrote the Sefer on halakhot Lashon Hara, and he called it Chafetz Chaim, and that's how he became known. He's also very famous for writing the Mishnah Berurah, and sometimes people call him the Mishnah Berurah. Who wrote the Mishnah Berurah? The Chafetz Chaim wrote the Mishnah Berurah. Who wrote the Chafetz Chaim? The Mishnah Berurah wrote the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim also, the Mishnah Berurah, wrote lots of other things as well. And also amongst the things that he wrote many, many Sfarim. He wrote a Sefer called Ahavat Yisrael, about the mitzvah of loving other Jews. And in the third perek, that he highlights a number of things that can cause a person to hate other people. That's unnecessarily, illegitimately. I want to look at what those are. So he says, Reishit Lakol, first of all, Hagorem Lavon Zehi Hakina. The thing that really makes you hate other people is really you're jealous of them. If you try and think, why do you dislike somebody else? It's because you're jealous of them, very often. Person will be jealous of other people for lots of other reasons. So sometimes you're jealous of somebody else because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed them with wealth and riches. They're more successful than you. They've got a nicer house than you. Everything that the person does, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it enables them to succeed. You're jealous of them. And because you're jealous, as a result, you hate them. That's number one. So if you dislike a person, try and think, is it because actually you're jealous of what they've got? Maybe that is what it's all about. They drive a Jag and you're stuck on a bicycle. That's whatever it is. They live in a 5-bedroom house and you live in a 3-bedroom house. That's why you dislike them, and that's why you find fault in everything they do. When you drill down and look beneath the covers, you understand that's what it's really sometimes, sometimes it might be to do with a person's professional status. That you're a lawyer and they're a lawyer, and you work hard and they work hard, but they've got a better reputation out there than you have. So the other lawyers are jealous of him and hate them. Because you think that the successful lawyer, the famous lawyer, is actually doing better than you're doing. And it's the reason why you're not doing so well. It's because they're taking away all your business. Number 3, perhaps the other person is more respected than you are. You're bothered by the way that the other person is respected. Even though you would like kavod seems to always avoid you. And instead of getting kavod, you're treated badly. And that's why you hate him intensely. And number 4, sometimes you hate a person because you look at the other person and you realize that actually this is a noble person, and everybody admires them for good reason. And even though you realize that you are missing all these characteristics, at the end of the day, you're jealous of that person, and as a result of your jealousy, you come to hate them. These are the things which lead a person to baseless hatred. Chafetz Chaim goes on to say, he's going to explain how all these things are based on falsehood. There might be reasons to hate somebody, but those are certainly not good reasons. So what we see is Rav Kook has said that Sinat Chinam is really any type of hatred. The Chafetz Chaim has said that there are times when it's understandable why we hate people, but there are other times when it's not acceptable. Neither of them say that Sinat Chinam is just hating a person for no reason whatsoever. And the Chafetz Chaim has given us reasons why you might hate a person. They're not legitimate reasons, but they're reasons. It didn't seem to occur to either of them that sometimes just hatred might be out there. And maybe that was the problem at the time of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. And I've been thinking about it in the course of preparing this shir, and it occurred to me that there is something which is simply Sinat Chinam in its most basic sense, pure, unnecessary hatred. And unfortunately and sadly, that's something which I suspect it's always been around, but is more at the fore nowadays than in previous generations, for in part technical reasons that the world has presented us with. And that is that sometimes people just extend hatred for no reason whatsoever. I experienced it myself, not in a technical context, but recently I was riding my bicycle from A to B. I was cycling somewhere, and it was a hill. I was having, it was tough going up the hill. A car drove past me. People wound down their windows and just shouted abuse at me. I wasn't even in their way, and they weren't even claiming that I was in their way. So they just shouted rude stuff at me, making fun at me for riding my bicycle. That was a classic example of Sinat Chinam. They were expressing hatred of me, mocking me. They didn't know who I was. I wasn't in their way. I wasn't affecting them. They just had to laugh and drove on. You see this in bullying. What is, very often bullying. You don't even know the person, shouting abuse. Sinat Chinam, we can be walking down the streets with our kippot on, or Shabbat, wearing our Shabbat clothes. Somebody we don't know, never met before, just shouts racist abuse at us. Why? Because we're Jewish. We saw this the course of this past week. That's on Instagram. That's racial abuse of Am Yisrael by a famous personality. That's Sinat Chinam. That's what it is. It's baseless. It's for no reason. And indeed, the internet and social media has made Sinat Chinam so much easier than it previously was. It's very often you look at the comment sections on Facebook or on online articles and the like. And it's so easy for people now to hide behind their computers or their phones and give abuse. That's simply Sinat Chinam. I was reading an article about something, mentioned various people. It was to do with an educational institution, and it mentioned in a positive way certain of the people involved in the institution. In the comments section, using pseudonyms, there were people who were sounding off about those teachers and administrators. That was sinat chinam. They just used this as an opportunity to be rude and insulting about other people in a way which they would never have the gumption to do were it in face-to-face or with other people around them. But now they can hide behind anonymity and be rude about people, express sinat chinam. And I think this is something that we need to be very, very careful about. We've suffered as Am Yisrael from sinat chinam over the generations. Abuse hurled at us in the street by people who don't know us for no reason other than sinat chinam. Online abuse in ways that we haven't experienced in previous generations because of sinat chinam, Twitter and Instagram, and Facebook and all these sorts of things. And we need to be doubly careful to make sure that when we're commenting on an article, when we're commenting on something, instead of being negative about it, either don't comment or be positive about it. But remember that negative comments so often can actually be an effect of sinat chinam. Why are we saying this? Are we trying to be constructive? If we're trying to engage in a constructive debate about something, about what something means, what something's about, then by all means we don't always have to be positive. But when our language becomes negative for no particular reason, with no benefit, so then it becomes sinat chinam. And as the Gemara tells us, why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed? Because of sinat chinam. Now in the Kinnot on page 111 in the Rosenfeld, 226 in the Art Scroll, 361, we're going to read about how Titus defiled the Beit HaMikdash in a shameless fashion, how he took a dagger and stabbed the parochet in front of the Kodesh HaKodashim to the degree that it bled, and he believed that he'd stabbed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how he brought in a harlot to the Kodesh HaKodashim and consorted with the harlot there, how he took hundreds of young children and sent them off to Rome. Zachor asher asat sar bifnim shalaf kerbo balafnai v'lifnim nachalatenu b'yait k'timei lechem hapanim v'gider parochet balat shtei fanim yutomim giel b'makein madam v'yimateit kav b'mare adam dam meimenu dalach v'shkir chitzav midam ki yatsa min habayit v'charbo milei adam Al hagoto havodka avebenatay el yato limulo ligbar mitzrayim chololo omar shebamavar bani betochi buyo arutz elaf betzavar avoteinu zarak ichnisu bachurav achla eish v'zet soaz ona ichnis v'lo nichna v'nichva ba'eish avadim chitu b'suko labat eish ba'almeh b'veit eish mimarom shalach eish. The Paitan here is comparing the behavior of the two sons of Aaron who brought in Eish Zara. They brought in a foreign fire to the Beit HaMikdash, but with good motivation. They wanted to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they were cut down by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How was it that Titus was able to come into the Beit HaMikdash and defile it, and nothing happened to him? B'nafshenu tavanu b'hotzich leisharet sama'am b'onishrait bam lahashret orenu makishkim misharet v'lo matzati shimu shlosha leisharet nashim kisharu kivaritz b'karka baitan alav hechritz sarim lupatu b'vo paritz b'veit kodesh hakodashim sachanato hishritz bachurim mibachut sagum nuchuzakim v'taru ki yuzak b'shishim ribo mazikim Zekeinim nivatu kehirshu mishchakim asot v'tzonovu asu bazikim shavat sotein v'yafo atmon v'yisabeit choma v'yaveit hamon nafla evral minei pitzel lachlus v'armon ad kinu tashmi dok armon al petach har habayit heichel lavo biad arba'a rashei tafsurav lacharivo Atzad maravi lezecher hisritbo, the tzaga char kotleinu v'lo rav rivo. אתה קצבת והרשית לפנות ילדים השם בהם כל מאום משם להפנות. למה רגשו גויים ראשה אתה אל המנחה פנות ושילחום לארץ חוץ בשלוש ספינות. השיבנו שיבו קבעו בנפקי ים ושיתפו עצמם יחד לנפול בים. שיר ותשפחות שוררו קל ים כי עליך הורגנו במצולות ים. כי תומות באו עד נפשן כל זאת בעטנו ולא שחלקנוך חילו לממשן תקוותם נתנו למשיב מבשן ובת כל נשמע אורה למה תישן. The next Kinnot is on page 120 in the Rosenfeld, page 232 in the Art Scroll, and page 375 in the Koren. And this again describes that the scenes of desolation in Yerushalayim, that's at the time of the Churban Habayit, but it describes events that took place thousands of years ago and 100 years ago. Every time I read this Kinnot on Tisha B'Av, Im Tocham Nashim Piryam, on Leiti Puchim, and I think about how women could devour their own offspring, the children of their tender care. Talks about how people were reduced to eating the flesh of their own children and killing their own children, about the starvation that there was in Yerushalayim, about the swollen corpses that lay about the streets, about the miscarriages and the dried up breasts, about the murder, the necks of 80,000 anointed priests which were broken. That's how piles of children's brains were piled up on one stone. How tender and delicate women were seen walking in fetters at the hand of the chief executioner. I think about how Jewish history repeats itself. So many of the Kinnot, which we read today, were written for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and for the Shoah. This Kinnot could be a Kinnot for the Shoah 75 years ago. If we were given it, that's without any title, without being told when it was written, who it was written by, you could very easily believe that it's describing the events that we're also familiar with from books and from pictures at the time of the Shoah. And I think what this Kinnot does is emphasize for us that the Churban Beit HaMikdash was the beginning of 2,000 years of persecution, of galut, of trials and tribulations that haven't yet gone away. And it wasn't just one event. People sometimes wonder, why should we mourn something that happened 2,000 years ago? It's because we're not just mourning what happened 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago was the martyr. It gave reshut. It enabled all these tragedies to happen time and again over the course of the subsequent generations. Im tochalna nashim piryam olalei tipuchem alalayli. Im tvashelna nashim rachmaniyot yaldehen hamadudim tvachim alalayli. Im tigozna patrosham v'tikasharna lususim porchem alalayli. Im tidbat nishon yonei lechech b'tzimon sechichem alalayli. Im Tehom Nazunu Matsu Boin Vashet Banin Sorchem Alalayli. Im Tivaad Nazolazot and even April Chavuim Nutach Nutachem Alalayli. Im Tasmin Basar Avot Labanim Bimarot Vashichem Alalayli. Im Tuchuyav Labanot El Chekimotam Nitbachem Alalayli. Im Tatos Naruchot Olalim Birchovot Kiryat Fuchem Alalayli. Im tiakerna bishikul racham tzimuk shadayim va'im albanim shachim alalayli. Im tikashana shmone meot maginim barabaluchim alalayli. Im tuluhat narucham b'minei menuchim v'nodot nefuchem alalayli. Im timaat na me'elef mea sarat echad lamapachem alalayli. Im tanos malmasachim chal shmonim elef kohanim parachim alalayli. Next verse describes the way that so many souls were burned at the time of the Churban Beit HaMikdash, at the times of the Inquisition, and at the times of the Shoah. In tisarafna sham kol atam anafashot kukotzim kesuchim alalayli. In terafna al dam naki 80,000 kohanim meshuchim alalayli. In tipachna nafashot medukareim meireach tunugosichim alalayli. In titzavarna leven achad Tisha kabin mochei ladim nunachim alalayli. In tukana 300 yonkim al sochachat metuchim Alalayli. In Teira en halakhot vanugot kvulot al yad rav hatabachim alalayli. In Tisha chavna ben shvatayim benot melachim meshubachim alalayli. In titalafna betulot vabachurim betzimon sechichem alalayli. Baruach hakodesh lemulam amarim hoyal kol shechinai haraim. Mashu kra'am modiyim v'yet asher asu lo modiyim. Im tochal nanashim priyam mashmiyim, im yeharei b'mikdash Adonai kohen navi, lo mashmiyim. And continuing the theme of comparing and contrasting Kinnot, we move to page 123 in the Rosenfeld, 240 in the Art Scroll, 393 in the Koran, where we compare how and contrast how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, over the generations, has been so generous and so kind and so indulging of the Jewish people, and how we should be ashamed of ourselves for our behavior and for rejecting HaKadosh Baruch Hu so many times. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'otzot asher fleita me'as v'yadata v'lanu boshet hapanim b'vchina shenitzrafnu v'otanu tiyavta. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'goy mikerev goy lakachta b'masot v'lanu boshet hapanim b'dofi asher nimtzavanu k'masehem masot. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka balchu Elohim liftot l'olam v'lanu boshet hapanim v'yamru al yam b'yam suf goy belohav b'fosham. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'zeichev atem eidai v'ani Elohim Lanu boshet hapanim b'chorfeinu b'simku masei lanu Elohim. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'tam she'tamtanu k'tzapichit b'dvash v'lanu boshet hapanim b'yom hikravnu l'fanav solet v'ashemen u'dvash. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'chilkul manu v'erva mudanan v'lanu boshet hapanim b'lechem ha'klokel avoteinu b'oleihem b'rognan. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the man in the desert. And what did we do? We just complained that this is disgusting food. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'midbar lo chasarnu davar v'lanu boshet hapanim b'natzot lavan v'chatero v'tizahav kimdubar. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'sichon ma'og v'malchei Canaan v'lanu boshet hapanim b'achan Hashem al b'cherem b'limtzom ma'an. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'foal asher pa'alta b'arba asa moshiyem v'lanu boshet hapanim b'tzelem micha ki bo anachnu poshem. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'kimat Shiloh v'nov givonu v'eit olamim v'lanu boshet hapanim b'resha shenimtza v'anu shecharvu v'anu nichlamim. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'shnei chorbanot shecharvu b'vitzeinu v'anu kayamim v'anu boshet hapanim b'shuveinu elecha b'chol leiv shetashuv eleinu b'rachamim. Lecha Adonai hatzdaka b'shameot shana shayta sinach v'usham el hishama v'lanu boshet hapanim k'tzava ish chamudot v'shiva hata Elohai osgamcha u'shama. The next Kinnot Levanon moves theme radically, not to talk about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, but to talk about other tragedies which have befallen the Jewish people over the course of history. We're going to start with the story of the Asara Harugei Malchut, the 10 martyrs murdered by the Romans. That's many more than 10 people murdered by the Romans, but the 10 teachers of Torah murdered by the Romans 100 years after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And we'll learn about Rabbi Chutzpit HaTurgaman, We're going to take just a 5-minute comfort break, and we'll resume at 5 to 11. We continue now with a discussion of the Asara Harugei Malchut, the 10 martyred rabbis. We read about the Asara Harugei Malchut twice a year. Today on Tisha B'Av, we read the Kinnot of Arzei Halavanon, and on Yom Kippur, we read the Slicha of Eila Ezkara. That comes up in Musaf after the Seder HaAvodah. There are various midrashim which talk about the martyrdom of rabbis at the time of the Roman persecution. They talk about 10 rabbis being martyred. There are different lists. So in total, the Asara Harugei Malchut actually were about 14. The Romans murdered far more than 14 scholars, but these are 14 prominent scholars who were martyred, and they perhaps were the intellectual elite and leadership of the people. Rav Soloveitchik discusses why the martyrdom of the Torah scholars is so important in our understanding of Tisha B'Av, and he says that initially the Romans just intended destroying the Beit HaMikdash and were happy to let people remain studying and practicing Judaism. They thought that without a Beit HaMikdash, Judaism and therefore Am Yisrael and the political power as well of Am Yisrael would disappear pretty quickly. Without a Beit HaMikdash, how can the people survive? So they were mistaken because they realized that the Beit HaMikdash might be the body, but the Torah and the mitzvot are the souls of the people. And therefore, whilst the souls of the people are still, the heart of the people is still beating strongly, it was impossible that the people would die out. So therefore, they turned their attentions to destroying scholarship. Now, the Kinnot doesn't actually have all 10 martyrs mentioned, but one of them mentioned both in the Kinnot on Tisha B'Av and the Slicha on Yom Kippur is Rabbi Chutzpit. As we don't know much about Rabbi Chutzpit. Rabbi Chutzpit only comes up in the Talmud at a handful of times, and we're not told much about his death in these Kinnot. It's in Rabbi Akiva. We have an account in the Gemara of how he was killed, and an account in the Kinnot, an account in the Slicha. Last year we learned about Rabbi Hanania ben Teradion, and we had accounts there in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah and in the Kinnot about what happened. We just have one line here about Rabbi Chutzpit. We're told, V'acharav Rabbi Chutzpit b'yom Evra. Next to be killed was Rabbi Chutzpit on the day of wrath. Afhab of haporech nisraf b'haval piv, and the breath of whose mouth was so fiery with his learning that it's a singe of passing bird, kivim dura, as if it was like he was like a furnace, like a fire. So we know that he was killed, and we know that, okay, if a bird passed over him whilst he was learning Torah, so then it was burnt in the sky. We're not told much more in Eila Ezkara on Yom Kippur. They were killed, the martyrs were killed for not doing very much. Baharigat Rabbi Chutzpit HaMaturgaman, Rabbi Chutzpit the Maturgaman, the translator, he was also killed. So we're just told that he was killed. So let's start off by trying to understand who Rabbi Chutzpit HaTurgaman was. That's because to be able to mourn him properly, we need to have an understanding of who he was. So the Selicha Yom Kippur tells us he was the Turgaman. He was a translator. We know that from a Gemara Masechet Brachot, the famous Masechet in Gemara Masechet Brachot in the 4th Perek, discussing whether Tfilat Arvit is a Reshut or Chovah, whether it's obligatory or optional to say Mariv in the evening. So there was a famous Machloket with Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, and we're told there that Chutzpit HaMaturgaman, He was the translator. Now, what was the translator? In Talmudic times, nowadays, if you want to give a share, you give it on Facebook or Zoom. That's a few years ago, you gave it in the Beis HaMedrash, and if you didn't have a strong voice, it wasn't Shabbat or Yom Tov, you had a microphone so you could be heard. That's in Talmudic times, you didn't have a microphone. So the Rosh Yeshiva that would sit in the Beit Midrash, and he would mumble his shir into his beard, that nobody could really hear it. And the Maturgaman, or the Turgaman, would listen to it. And then he would stand up and he would repeat it to everybody. He presumably had a loud voice. And he would say, our teacher said, and he would then say over the shir. A bit like, I suppose, when one speaks to a foreign audience and you can't speak the language that they speak, so you have to have an interpreter. So every 5 minutes you'll stop and the interpreter will summarize what you said and repeat it in a language that everybody can understand. So that was the role of Chutzpit HaTurgeman. This took place in Yavne. That's the Tosefta in Masechet Kelim that says that Chutzpit HaTurgeman was one, or Rabbi Chutzpit was one of 4 Zakenim, 4 elders in Tzipori. So there were 4 Zakenim sitting with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Charash, but secretly, but Tzipori. So this was at the time of the Roman persecutions. I suppose they were in Yavne. Yavne was a known site of learning, known seat of learning. But then they relocated to Tzipori, Charash. That means they were secreted there. They were studying secretly in Tzipori. Rabbi Chutzpit, Rabbi Yeshvav, Rabbi Chalfat, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yeshevav is also mentioned in the Kinnot. So you can see on the map that the blob at the bottom is roughly where Yavne is, and the mark at the top is roughly where Tzipori is. So he was with Rabban Gamliel in Yavne. And I guess Yavne closed down, had to go into hiding, and he was in hiding in Tzipori in the north of Israel. So in the page 9, we now have an introduction to what was going on with the Harugei Malchut. How do we know that there were 10 Harugei Malchut? So there's a pasuk in Eicha, Bila Adonai v'lo chamal, et kol no'ot Yaakov. Hashem swallowed and didn't have mercy on all the beauty of Yaakov. Rabbi Pinchas b'shem Rabbi Yosha Omar, Taf pei batei kinesiot hayu Yerushalayim. There were 480 batei kinesiot, synagogues in Yerushalayim. Minyan Meleati Mishpat. That's the gematria of the word Meleati Mishpat. Meleati Mishpat means I'm filled with justice. Meleati Kativ. It's written, can be written, that's chaser without the aleph, and that gives us 480. Every one of these 480 synagogues had a school and a yeshiva attached to it. Beit Sefer the Mikra, Beit Talmud the Mishnah. The Beit Sefer, they learnt scripture in it, and in the Beit Talmud, in the yeshiva, they learnt Mishnah. So we see that at the time of the Churban HaBayit, Yerushalayim was chock-a-block full of study. Davar Acher, another way of interpreting it, Bila Adonai v'lo chamal, Eid kol not Yaakov, Eid kol not Tav shel Yaakov. All the beautiful personalities of Yaakov. Gone. Rabbi Yishmael, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshvav, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bavav, Rabbi Chutzpit HaTurgeman, Rabbi Yehuda HaNachton, Rabbi Chananya ben Teradion, Rabbi Akiva, Ben Azai, Rabbi Tarfon. So we've mentioned there 10 rabbis who the Medrash asserts were murdered by the Romans. Ve'it Speikin Rabbi Tarfon and Ma'ilin Rabbi Elazar Charsana. And there's some who remove Rabbi Tarfon from this list and they put in Rabbi Elazar Charsana. So we see that there's a debate exactly who the 10 martyrs were. As I said, there were more than 10 scholars. We look in different versions of the Midrashim, different versions of the Piyutim, we'll find there are about 14 scholars mentioned. I think there's an article in the Encyclopedia Judaica which addresses this question. So why do we always talk about the Asara Harugei Malchut? So I think we talk about Asara Harugei Malchut because of the importance of the number 10. Ba'asara Marot Nivrah Olam. The world was created with 10 utterances. So we have 10 rabbis corresponding to the 10 utterances with which the world was created. That's if those 10 rabbis are massacred, then it's as if the world is massacred. There are Aseret HaDibrot, 10 commandments. So if those 10 commandments, if those 10 rabbis disappear, it's like the 10 commandments have disappeared. There are 10 halalukas in the final chapter of Tehillim, praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If the 10 martyrs are massacred, so then those 10 ways of praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu also disappear. In terms of martyring 10 martyrs is symbolic of much greater things. Now, the Kinnot doesn't tell us much about the martyrdom of Rabbi Chutzpit, nor does the classical Midrashim. But there are later Midrashim as well, which talk about the martyrdom, the most famous of which is Midrash Eila Ezkara, which is essentially a very long Kinnot. It's probably post-Midrashic in its timing. The Midrashim that are essentially late Tanaitic, early Amoraitic works would have been written down probably in the 4th, 5th centuries. That Midrash Eila Ezkara is much later. I don't know if it's really using eyewitness testimony or which was passed on amongst the generations, or perhaps it's some sort of documentary / fictional account of what happened, but certainly a way of making us keenly aware of the enormity of the tragedy of what happened. There aren't any earlier sources that we have which back up what's written in Eila Ezkara, so that we don't know exactly what happened. But this midrash has a very moving account of what happened with Rabbi Chutzpit. So V'acharav hotzi Rabbi Chutzpit HaMeturgeman. Next taken out was Rabbi Chutzpit. Amru alav Rabbi Chutzpit HaMeturgeman shehaya ben kuf lamed shana. So they said about him that he was 130 years old. That's when they took him out to be killed. So that's obviously a very ripe old age. People in Roman times weren't usually living to that age. It shows that the greatness of Rabbi Chutzpit, even if Rabbi Chutzpit wasn't 130, it doesn't matter, because Chazal, always in Midrashim, where they make fantastic statements, they're trying to convey a message to us. That's what message were they conveying to us? They were conveying to us the message that Rabbi Chutzpit was a venerable old scholar. This was an old man. The Romans, weren't bothered about taking out, an immensely old man and putting him to death for teaching Torah. He was beautiful of appearance, beautiful of form. Same language is used to describe Yosef in Chumash. And he was angelic in his appearance. So they went and told the Melech about the Roman emperor. They told him, Rabbi Chutzpit, don't kill him. He's a really handsome person. He's really old. Let's have some mercy on him. V'amar lahu, he said to them, B'chayecha Adoni, they said to him, B'chayecha Adoni, Trachim al Azakin hazeh, have some mercy on this elder. So it's interesting, we're seeing that the Roman officers actually wanted to save Rabbi Chutzpit from death. Amar HaKesar, so the emperor, Caesar, said, the Rabbi Chutzpit, Ben kama shani ata, how old are you? Amar le, he responded, Kuf lanu shana miyom echad, that I'm 1 day short of 130. I want you, please, can you wait 1 day before putting me to death? That's Amar al Caesar. So the Caesar said, who cares whether you, what difference does it make today, whether you die today or you die tomorrow? Amar, he said to him, I'm not worried about a birthday party and a birthday cake. That's not what I'm looking forward to. I'm not going to get a telegram from the Queen. Certainly not. You're the Caesar. You want to put me to death. I want to fulfill 2 more mitzvot. So the Caesar said, what mitzvah is it that you want to do? I want to say Shema tonight and again tomorrow morning. So that I can proclaim the kingship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the sovereignty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar le Caesar. So the Caesar said to him, Azei panim v'azei nefesh, that you are brazen-faced and brazen-souled. How much more confidence and trust do you have in your God? He's got no power to save you from me. My ancestors, they destroyed the temple and they cast the corpses of the Jews around Yerushalayim. Nobody's buried them yet. Your God is tired and worn out. They were mocking God. They were saying, look, he was powerless at the time of the Churban Habayit. What's the point of you being Mamlech HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What's the point of you claiming that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is powerful? What's the point of you proclaiming him as sovereign? He's useless. Once upon a time, the Almighty was powerful. And that's not the case any longer. Now, in the old days, he could fight against Sisera, he could fight against Paro. But he didn't fight against the Romans when they destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. He's had it. He's gone. Rabbi Chutzpit kach. When Rabbi Chutzpit heard this, he cried out loud, and he tore his clothes about the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had been blasphemed. And he said to the Caesar, woe to you, what are you going to do at the end of days when HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and visits against Rome and its false gods? Amar HaMelech, the king said, why should I bother carrying on having these silly arguments? And he said that Chutzpit should be killed and stoned and hung. Again, we see very interestingly that the Roman officers, perhaps they weren't officers, perhaps they were just servants who had to carry out the commands. They wanted at least to be able to bury Chutzpit so that he would have a proper burial. That's why and the king allowed him to be buried. And his Talmidim came and buried him. And there was an enormous memorial gathering. It's very interesting that they say that he was buried, because that's not the import of the Gemara in Masechet Kiddushin. Towards the end of the first perek, Masechet Kiddushin discusses how Acher, that's Elisha ben Abuya, what tipped him over the edge, pushed him over the edge, that he became a heretic. So the Gemara says, he saw the tongue of Chutzpit the Maturgaman. That a davar acher is a euphemism for a pig. He saw a pig running around the streets that's with Chutzpit's tongue in its mouth. Amar, he said, Peshe Pikmar Gariot, that's the mouth that could produce such pearls of wisdom, that is left to lick the dust on the ground, nafak chatan, he went out and sinned. So this seems to imply that Rabbi Chutzpit wasn't actually buried, that his corpse was just chucked out, and that a pig got hold of his tongue and dragged it around. It's also interesting that Rabbi Chutzpit was clearly an enormous scholar in his own right. That's Per Shehefik Margaliot. He's described as the mouth that produced pearls of wisdom, even though he was a Turgaman. A Turgaman, you would have thought, is a lowly scholar. He doesn't say anything new, he just repeats what everybody else says. But it seems that, no, he was actually a distinguished scholar. The Kinnot made reference to that when a bird flew over him, it would be singed or burnt by the heat coming from the fire coming from his mouth. That's not mentioned in any of the texts that we've seen. The Or Zarua, an Italian medieval Rishon, that he makes reference to this. He says, so he says that Chutzpit the Maturgaman was one of the 10 martyrs. Yonatan ben Uziel. He was as valuable to us as Yonatan ben Uziel. Who was Yonatan ben Uziel? Yonatan ben Uziel, we know that we say that he wrote the Targum on Ketuvim, on the Nevi'im, non Ketuvim, and there's the Targum Yonatan ben Uziel on Chumash. That's probably not written by Yonatan ben Uziel, but it's attributed to him in some way. That's perhaps he inspired it. And Chazal tell us, this is in the Gemara in Sukkah, that Yonatan ben Uziel, the fiery relationship that he had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that was so great and so awesome that as he learned, the heat above him was so enormous that any bird that flew over him was burnt immediately. The Ozara says this is Kedama b'midrash asara harugei melucha. So I couldn't find it in the midrash, but and the case with midrashim very often is they're variant texts and they were copied in different ways, different manuscripts by different people. So presumably the Ozarua had the text that we don't have. But there is certainly a tradition that Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel that was an immense and pious Talmid Chacham. We spoke about the burial of Rabbi Chutzpit HaTurgaman. I've got on page 10 some pictures of his kever. It's at Tzfat, which is obviously near Tzipori. You can't see in the black and white pictures that I printed out. I think on the if you've got them on the web, the dome is blue, as are so many of the Kavarim in Tzfat, to ward off evil spirits. As you can see inside, that's in the second row of pictures, you can see that's his kever, Tzion Hatana Kadosh Rabbi Chutzpit HaMaturgaman, Me'asara Harugei Malchut, the memorial stone to the holy Tana, Rabbi Chutzpit HaMaturgaman. If you move over to the right-hand side picture, you can see that for some reason his kever has been taken over by Nachmanites and seems to have Nachman Meuman that's graffitied all over it. So that's an interesting development in recent years. The first picture doesn't have that. I don't know when these decorations, as it were, appeared. At the bottom, you have the other kever of Rabbi Chutzpit HaTurgaman. So it seems that there are two traditions of where Rabbi Chutzpit is buried, and both graves are marked. So there was an ancient tradition that he was buried either by a well or at the bottom of a well, or a well was buried or was dug on top of his grave, whatever it is. There were two sites of wells, and so he has the perhaps dubious merit of having two burial places in Safat. The Kinnot that we're going to read is on page 125 in the Rosenfeld, 248 in the Art Scroll. Every year I think that it's a significant page number there in the Art Scroll, 248. Reish Mem Chet, 248 positive mitzvot in the Torah, and that should be associated with Arzai Halavanon, and page 415 in the Koren. Arzai Halavanon Adirei HaTorah Balei Treisim B'Mishnah V'Gmara Giborei Choach Hamaleh B'Tara Dam Nishpach V'Nashta Gvura Hinam Kedoshei Harugei Malchut HaSara Balei Anivoch Yaveini Nigra Zoz B'Zochri Ezak B'Mara Chendat Yisrael Klei HaKodesh Nezev HaTara Torah Leiv Kedoshim Meitu B'Mitzah Chamura Yadu Goral Mirishon Lacheret Pura Kinfol Goral Rabban Shimon Pashat Tzavaru V'Achak Nigzra Gzeira The Rabban Shimon Chazar Asara Lahorgo B'Nefesh Nitzura Misera Aaron Shal B'Vakasha Livkos Al Ben Hagvira Natal Roshon Tzanola Kubuotav Menorah Torah Sameina Valina Avufiva Pipa Vagmura Anamamar Pamit Gaber Batora Pitom Niknasa Alav Mitzah Mushuna Vachamura Tzivalav Shitet Rosho Batar Hasachira Kiam Boro Amrun Nafshech Shechiv Navora Rasha Haposhet Eiti Gialim Kom Tfilim Mitzvat Bara Tzaka Tzaka V'nistaza olam ve'eretz itporara Mecharav heviu es Rabbi Akiva Oker harim tochanan zo bazo bisvara B'sarku b'saro B'masreit bazel hishtabra Yatzta nishmato be'echad Uvat kol amara Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva Gufecha tahor B'chol minei tahara Ben bava Rabbi Yehuda Charav heviu B'shivron leve azhara Nerag bin shivim shava B'idei arura Yoshev b'tanit haya Naki v'chasid b'mlachto l'mahara Rabbi Chananya ben Tzuradion Acharav Makil Kilo B'tzion Shara Yoshev Doresh Seve Torah Imo V'kifuz B'chavilei Zmora Et ha'or hiksitu V'hem V'charachu B'sefer Torah Sfogin Shel Tzemer Hinicha Libo Shel Yomut Meira Chasid Rabbi Yeshevav HaSofer Haragu Amamora Zuraku V'shlichu L'klavim V'lo Bar B'gvura Yatzta Bat Kol Alav Shelo Niach Klum Mitzorat Moshe L'Shamara Bacharav Rabbi Chutzpit B'yom Evra Of HaPoreach Nisraf B'aval Piv Kevim Dura Tzadik Rabbi Elazar Ben Shamua B'acharona Nerag V'mad Kira Yomer Shabbat Haya Zman Kiddush V'aykadesh V'yikra Cherev Shalfu Alav Lo Yinichu B'chayim Legamera Yatzta Nishmato B'vara Elohim Yotzer v'tzar tzura Kahena v'chahena osif b'nei avla lanot b'gara B'skilas rei v'areng v'chanek miyuchal l'shara Noter v'mena yochlu arayot sefer zura Chazay ha'tnufa v'shok ha'truma Tarufu aryeh v'ha'kfira Yetiv Adonai v'lo yosif od yasra Amez b'kain koshelot chelek Yaakov v'Moshe b'eit Sarah L'tzedek yimloch melech yomar shalmu yim evlech We're going to go on now to a further one of the Kinnot, which is compare and contrast, and this is H2 Kad B'Kirbi, which is on page 144 in the Rosenfeld, 304 in the Art Scroll, 515 in the Koren edition of the Kinnot. This is comparing and contrasting the elevation and the excitement and the grandeur of the Jewish people when they left Egypt with the downfall of the Jewish people when they left Yerushalayim. Shtuka b'kirbi baloti al libi v'tzeiti mimitzrayim kinima ira lamanas kira v'tzeiti mirushalayim Asya Shemosher Shelo Yinasher v'tzeiti mimitzrayim v'ikonein Yirmiyav v'nahai Nehiniya v'tzeiti mirushalayim Beiti hitkodan v'shachan ha'anan v'tzeiti mimitzrayim v'chamat el shachana laikanana v'tzeiti mirushalayim Gala yam hamu v'chachom hakamu v'tzeiti mimitzrayim Zudonim shatafu v'arosh itzafu v'tzeiti mirushalayim Degan shamayim v'tzoyasov mayim v'tzeiti mimitzrayim lana v'tamrurim umayim chamarim v'tzeiti mirushalayim hashkem v'ha'arev savivot ha'chorev v'tzeiti mimitzrayim korei al-evel al naharot bavel v'tzeiti mirushalayim Umarei kavot Adonai, keishochelet lefanai, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, v'cherev letusha, latevach letusha, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, zevach u'mincha, v'shemen hamishcha, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, sugulat elekucha, katzod lativcha, V'tzeiti mirushalayim, chagim v'shabbatot, u'motim ba'otot, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, tanit v'evel, u'tof ha'hevel, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, tovu ohalim, la'arba'at galim, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, ohalei ishmaelim, u'machanot ha're'elim, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, yovel u'shmita, v'eretz shoketa, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, machur litzmitut, v'charut lichritut, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, kaporet v'aron, v'avnei zikaron, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, v'avnei ha'ka'ala, uchlei ha'ba'ala, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, leviyim v'aronim, v'shivim haskenim, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, noksim u'monim, u'mochrim v'konim, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, Moshe yirenu, v'aron yanchenu, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, Nebuchadnezzar tefsav, Adrianus Caesar, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, Naroch milchama, v'Adonai shama, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, Rachak mimenu, v'neinenu, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, Sitrei farochet, v'sitrei marechet, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, Chemani ta'achet, v'alai sochachet, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, olot uzvachim, v'isheni chokim, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, v'chutzot medukarim, v'nei Tzion ha'yikarim, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, parei mikbaot, v'chavot mikbaot, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, sherikot u'truot, v'kolot u'zava'ot, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, tzitz ha'zahav, v'hamshel v'rav, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, u'shlach ha'nezer, v'yafas ha'ezer, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, kedusha nefuah, v'vod Adonai ne'era, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, nigala u'mora'ah, v'ruach ha'tumah, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, rina v'shua, v'chatzot shot ha'trua, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, zakat olal, v'nakat chalal, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, shulchan u'menorah, v'chalel u'ktorah, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, elu v'toeva, u'fesel u'matzeva, v'tzeiti mirushalayim, Torah u'toda, v'seder ha'avodah, v'tzeiti mimitzrayim, sason v'simcha, v'nas yagon v'anacha, b'shuv Yerushalayim. The Kinnot now shift focus to what are known as the Tzionim, a group of Kinnot, primarily written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the 11th, 12th century, speaking not about the desolation of Eretz Yisrael and the desolation of Yerushalayim, but about the beauty of Eretz Yisrael and the beauty of Yerushalayim, both in a physical sense and in a spiritual sense as well. That remembering Yerushalayim is not just thinking about the downfall of Yerushalayim, but thinking about what a wonderful place it is, how beautiful it was when it was in existence, and how beautiful it will be when we return. That sometimes you mourn by remembering how bad things are and the disasters that have happened. Sometimes you mourn by thinking about what isn't there any longer, about the beauty of the land of Israel. I want to briefly share with you some thoughts about the beauty of Eretz Yisrael. That's the Ramban, who made his way towards the end of his life to Eretz Yisrael, and spent his last years there. That was a passionate Zionist. I don't know if he was a Zionist in the modern political sense, but he was certainly a lover of Zion, wanted to live in Zion, and he often speaks in very positive, warm terms about the importance of Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, the Makom HaMikdash in his commentaries and writings. I just want to bring to your attention one or two points from his commentary to Chumash. For example, I'm on page 11 in the handout on the left-hand side. That's what's labeled as page 26 there. That's where he talks about Malki Tzedek. That's Avraham Avinu. That's his encounter with Malki Tzedek after the battle of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. So Malki Tzedek is described as the Melech Shalem, the king of Shalem. Malki Tzedek is identified as Shem ben Avraham, and Shalem is identified by Chazal as Yerushalayim. You see in the second paragraph there, it says Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem, he Yerushalayim. That's Yerushalayim. This is the Ramban's commentary. Kinyan Shneimar. We've got a pasuk in Tehillim, Vahi b'Shalem Sukkot u'mo'onato b'Tzion. So Hashem's tabernacle is in Shalem, and his dwelling place in Tzion. Also in the time of Yoshua, the king of Shalem, the king of Yerushalayim, is known as Adonai Tzedek. Now, why even before Jewish sovereignty over Yerushalayim, why was the name of the monarch of Yerushalayim known as either Malki Tzedek or Adonai Tzedek? Because all nations knew at that time that place was a unique place on earth. It was in the middle of the world. Either they knew that geographically, or they had a tradition about its spiritual excellence. That it's directly beneath the Beit HaMikdash, the celestial Beit HaMikdash. There's a belief in Chazal that just as we build a Beit HaMikdash on earth, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a Beit HaMikdash in heaven, and that the two are immediately above and beneath each other. And therefore we see that Yerushalayim was a place that even in antiquity they knew that Yerushalayim was such a special and unique place. I want to bring to your attention something that Rabbi Lord Sachs wrote. It's published in the Koren Machzor for Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. That's both in the Israeli version and the American version and the UK edition, the United Synagogue edition. And he wonders what is so special about Eretz Yisrael. Why is that our land? And he says as follows, I'm reading halfway down page 12. There is another intriguing footnote within the Bible itself as to why this land is different. In a masterstroke of delayed information, Moses tells the Israelites that as they are almost within sight of the land. There is a qualification to the description is given all along, that it is a land flowing with milk and honey. It is a good land, but with one caveat. The land you are entering to take over is not like the land of Egypt, from which you have come, where you planted your seed and irrigated it by foot as in a vegetable garden. The land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It is the land the Lord your God cares for. The land of the Lord your God, the eyes of the Lord your God are continually on it, from the beginning of the year to its end. Israel is not the Nile Delta or the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. It is a land dependent on rain, and rain in that part of the world is not predictable. In a sense, we knew this already. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all have to migrate temporarily because of drought and famine. We have merely lost sight of this during the narrative, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, in which our focus has been on Egypt and the desert. But the passage intimates a correlation between geography and spirituality. Israel is a place where people look up to heaven in search of rain, not down to earth and its natural water supply. It is a place where you have to pray, not one in which nature and its seasons are predictable. This is the observation that Rabbi Sachs makes about the uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is a place which forces us to engage with our Kadosh Baruch Hu. Jewish people have been in difficult times, many instances throughout history. Of course, we've always davened to Hashem that he should come and save us. You think about persecutions during the Crusades, persecutions during the Middle Ages, and early modern times with the Cossacks and the like, and the Shoah, and all the persecutions during the course of Jewish history. Of course, we've poured out our hearts to Hashem, but we've also tried to engage in some way with those who are attacking us. That's to ask them to stop, to pay money to them, whatever it is, to try and flee from them, in a belief that they hold the key somewhat to the solution. Eretz Yisrael is different. At Eretz Yisrael, there's only one being with the key, and that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, the only thing we can do is turn towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu in prayer. So Eretz Yisrael is a place which is really designated for prayer. That's part of the spiritual excellence and uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael. Zion Havel Tishali is a very, very beautiful kinah that in some nuschaot, it's not just chanted to a dirge, but to really a lilting tune, which the tune itself illustrates the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, and we're going to play that recording now.
Zion halos yishali lishlom asirayich dorshei shalomech behem yeser adoroich miyam umizrach umitzafon v'seimon shalom rochok v'korov sei mikol avoroich ushlom asir tavo נושן דמוב כטל חרמון, ונכסוף לרעידתו מעל הרורייך. לבכוס נוסך הניסנים, ושכלום שיבה שבוסך, אני כינו לשירייך. ליבי לבייס אל, ולפני אל מאוד יהמה, ולמחנייך בכל פגרי טהורייך. שומע שכינו שכנו לך, ויוצא פוסח למול שערי שחק שעורייך. וכבוד השם לבד היום מעורך, בין שמש וסהר וכוכבים מאירייך. אבחר לנפשי אשתפה במקום, אשר רוח אלוקים שפוכו על בחירייך. את בייס מלוכו בת כיסא השם, ואיך ישבו עבודים עלי כיסוס גבירויך, מתנני משוטט במקומוס אשר נגלו אלוקים לחוזייך בצירויך. מי יעשה לי כנופיים וארחיק נדוד, עונוד לבשר לבבי בין בשרויך. אפול אפי עלי ארצך וארצה עוונייך מאוד, ואחונן ספורייך. אף כי בעומדי עלי כברוס אבוסי, ואשתומם בחברון עלי מבחר קבורייך. אעבור בירך וכרמילך ואמוד בגלעודך, ואשתוממו על הר עבורייך. הר הוא עבורים והור אשר שום שני הורים גדולים, מאירייך ואורייך. חיי נשומו סביר ארצך, וממור דרוך אבקס אפורך, בנוף אסוף נהורייך. ינעם לנפשי הלוך אורם ויוכף, עלי חורבו שמומו אשר היו דבירויך. במקום ארונך אשר נגנז, ובמקום קרובייך אשר שוכנו, חדרי חדורייך. אוגוז ושתי פר נזרי, וקוב זמן חלל בארץ טמאו, אס נזירוייך. איך ירב לי יכול ושטוס, ביסך חזק יסחבו הכלובים, אס כפירוייך. או איך מאור יום יהי מוסוק לעיני, בעוד ערב בפי ערבים פגרי נשורוייך. כוס היגון נמלאת הפי מעט, כי כבר מולוך אסולי ונפשי ממרורוייך. אס אזכרו לו אשתך מורך, ואזכרו ליבו ואמצא שמורייך. ציון כלילס יפי אהבו וכן תקשרי, מעוז ובוך נקשרו נפשוס חברייך. הם שמחים לשלווסך, והכואבים על שוממוסך, ובוכים על שברייך. מבור שבי שואפים נגדך, ומשתחווים איש ממקומו, למול נוכח שורייך. עדרי המונך אשר גולו, ויסלחו מהר לגבו, ולא שוכחו גדרייך. המחזיקים בשולייך, ומסמצים לעלוס ולחוז, בשם שיני סמורייך. שנעור ופסרוס הירחו בגודלום, ואם הבלום ידמו לסומייך ואורייך. אל מי ידמו משיחייך ואל מין לווייך, ואל מלוי יאיר ושורויך, ישנה ויחלוף כליל, כל ממלכוס הואליל, חוסנך לעולם, לדור ודור נזירויך, איבך למשה ולוקחי, ואשרינו שפחה, ויקרא וישכון, בחצרויך. אשרי מחכה ויגיע, ויראה עלוס אורך, ויבוקעו עולוב שחורייך, לראות בטובס בחייך, ולעלוס בשמחוסך, בשובך אלי קדמס נאורייך.
Another of the themes which comes up in the Kinnot is mourning tragedies other than the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and the events that followed in the time of the Roman persecutions, but other tragedies that have befallen Am Yisrael over the course of the centuries. There are a number of Kinnot which deal with the bloodlines, which deals with the Crusades and the destruction, particularly of the Rhineland communities during the time of the first Crusades. Also, very famously, we have the Kinav Shalis Rufa Va'esh, which deals with the burning of the Talmud in the streets of Paris in the 13th century. One of the themes that I wanted to discuss today, though time is running out, so I'm just going to touch on it very, very briefly, is the blood libels, which were present during the Middle Ages. The blood libels started off really in this country. The first documented blood libel was William of Norwich, which took place in the 12th century. That took place in 1144, and then very notably, there was also the case of Little St. Hugh of Lincoln in 1255, so 100 years later. If you look on the chart on page 15, you'll see that in the 12th century, there were 8 blood libels, that in the 13th century, 24, 7 of which took place in England. Then there weren't any more in England, but in the 14th century, 15th century, 24, and the 16th century, 26. So if you think about 24, 25 blood libels a century, that's every 4 years you've got a blood libel taking place. That's very, very significant. The notion of blood libels carried on well into the 20th century. There are numerous documentations, particularly there's famously the Baseless case, which took place in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. And there's a number of articles here of interest that people might want to read during the course of the day at their own leisure to do with the blood libels. We are not going to go through it together now, only to bring to your attention again, we might have looked at this in greater detail, but on page 19, we have from Chaucer, the Prioresses table. Chaucer, of course, wrote the Pilgrim's Tales, and the Prioresses tale, I've got it here, I've taken it from a translation from the old French English that Chaucer wrote in, but this is really describing the blood libel in this country. It's fictionally set in Asia. Chaucer says at the beginning, well, he says that it's set in Asia, but it's clear from his descriptions that this is a classic blood libel accusation. That you see that where the Christian boy is walking through the streets singing his prayers, and about a third of the way down the left-hand column. From thenceforth, the Jews there conspired the innocent from out this world to chase. A murderer to serve this end they hired, who in an alley had a private place. And as the child passed by at pace, this wretched Jew caught and held him fast, and cut his throat, and in the pit him cast. Into a privy drain that him they threw, where the Jews purged their entrails. O cursed folk of Herod, born anew, how shall your evil intent you avail? So we see this classic medieval trumped-up charges that the Jews killed Christian children and threw their bodies into the wells, poisoned the wells with the blood of the bodies of Christian children, and unfortunately, people believed it. This was a reality that to people, very often it was covering up for a Christian murderer. That if you could pin the blame on the Jews, then that was what people wanted to do. So as I say, there are a number of Kinnot which reflect that, and the Kinnot that I had planned on us reading, or we will read, that had planned on us reading, is on page 168 in the Rosenfeld Kinnot books. This is the Kinnot Kadosh York. It doesn't appear in the non-English editions or non-Anglo-Jewish editions. But many Kinnot were written in many communities. We have in our Kinnot books the 40-odd Kinnot which were universally accepted, but there were other Kinnot which were more wide, which were more localized. And this Kinnah on page 168 doesn't refer to the blood libels, but refers to contemporary events, the massacre of the Jews of York in 1190. And this is here in England. This is a well-known historical episode, but was reflective of the feelings at the time and the anti-Jewish sentiment that existed at the time. The Jews were regarded as an hated underclass, that they were only wanted for their money, and to perhaps legitimize the hatred for the Jews, so they were persecuted in this way. And as we know, on Erev Pesach in 1190, the Jews in Clifford's Tower were massacred. So again, this is a Kinnah that people can read perhaps in their own time today. The final Kinnah that I want to read today is the Kinnah in memory of the victims of the Shoah. That's the most recent persecution of Am Yisrael over the course of Jewish history, at the end of 2,000 years of persecution on and off throughout the centuries. It was topped by something which beat everything else in terms of its magnitude and its horrors, and that, of course, is the Shoah. So we're a generation that is quite well educated about the Shoah. But I wonder if in 100 or 200 years' time, the events of the Shoah will be of historical interest to our descendants as the blood libels and the burning of the Talmud are to us today. So we can read about the blood libels and it sounds unbelievable and horrible, but we don't really engage with it in an emotional sense. We don't feel like we've got any real connection to it. We can go to York and see Clifford's Tower. Rabbi Golem is presenting from Mizrahi United Synagogue on this Kinnah at Clifford's Tower. It's available online later today. We can have this historical interest in these things, but we don't feel like it's really touching us in the way that the Kinnah for the Shoah does touch us. Many of us know somebody who is a Holocaust survivor, or whose parents were Holocaust survivors, and we're able to engage with it in that way. And of course, the events only took place 75 years ago. It's one of the shocking things that even it's a short span of 75 years, there's already Holocaust deniers and revisionists. But for us as Jews, at least, it's something which is very, very real. But I often wonder how that's going to be in another 100 years' time. When I was the rabbi of Belmont, Gentleman lived round the corner to me. I lived on Felbridge Avenue. Around the corner, Beverly Gardens, number 4, lived the late Herman and Eva Hirschberger. Zichronam livracha. And Herman came to England in 1938 on the Kindertransport. And I had the privilege, the pleasure often was, walking home from shul with Herman many times on a Shabbat morning. Herman passed away earlier this year at the age of 91. And I want to pay tribute to Herman today, my friendship with Herman and the lessons that he taught me. I really didn't have much exposure to the Shoah other than in an academic sense. I've read some books, watched some films. I read the Kinnot. All that prior to Herman, but I'd never really experienced it emotionally till I walked home every Shabbat from shul with a person who'd experienced Kristallnacht, who'd had a gun held to his chest, who'd watched his father being dragged off from Karlsruhe, which was the city in which he grew up, to Dachau, which is where the men from Karlsruhe were taken. They were later returned to their hometown, but the fright of that, of the SS bursting into your home, taking your father away in that way. Ultimately, Herman's parents were killed and were murdered in Auschwitz. They weren't simply killed, they were murdered in Auschwitz. Herman and his brother, Rabbi Yoel, they were saved. They came to this country on the Kindertransport, and they were blessed that they were able to build up families and to build up lives and have meaningful lives. But very, very traumatic to go through life with that sort of baggage. I have here on page 20 a little bit about the city of Karlsruhe. This is where the Korban Netanel, I remember one of the first times I met Herman walking home from shul with him. Asked him where he was from originally. He told me he was from a place called Karlsruhe. Told me that was where the Korban Netanel lived. He said to me, "Do you know who the Korban Netanel was?" I said, "Yes, I know. It's a commentary on the Rosh. It's at the back of the Gemaras." He felt then that he had a proper rabbi. The rabbi knew who the Korban Netanel was, so I was legitimate in his eyes. On October 22nd, 1338, all male Polish Jews living in Karlsruhe were deported to Poland. The synagogues were destroyed on Kristallnacht, November 1938. Most of the men were arrested and sent to Dachau concentration camp, but were released after they had furnished proof that they intended to emigrate. In October 1940, 895 Jews were expelled and interned by the French Vichy authorities in Gurs in southern France, most of whom were deported from there to Auschwitz in November 1942. The 429 remaining Jews and non-Aryans were deported to the east between 1941 and 1944. There were 90 Jews living in Karlsruhe in May 1945, 63 in 1946, and 246 in 1968. An organized community was formed in 1945, and the Baden Central Jewish Council was reorganized in 1948, and the synagogue was built in 1969. As I say, Herman's parents were murdered in Auschwitz. On page 21, you can see a picture of Herman. It's on the right-hand side when he came to this country on the Kindertransport, and on the left-hand side in later years. So you can read on pages 22 and 23 that Herman's life story. This was published in the Indian Evening Standard in 2008. Some amazing stories. He talks about how he was sent away by his parents. He always used to say to me that the heroes of the Shoah were not the survivors, or whenever there was a Kindertransport reunion, as he felt the heroes were not the survivors, but the heroes were the parents who sent them, had the foresight to send their children. He said that he knew that his parents never expected to see him again. when they said goodbye to him. His parents took him to the train station, and they were told not to make a scene, not to German, be very dignified, not to call attention to themselves. There was to be no crying. But he says he remembers when his father said goodbye to them at the train station. His father put his hands on his head and blessed him, Yivarech Hashem Yishmerecha. And this was one of Herman's set of key psukim. When we had bought a new Sefer Torah, had a commissioned the Sefer Torah to be written in Belmont. Those were the psukim that Herman wanted. Those were the last words that his father said to him. He said, looking back, he knew that his father knew that he would never see him again. And that's why his father, Shamshon Aryeh, I remember Herman's name was Naftali ben Shamshon Aryeh. That's when Shamshon Aryeh gave him that blessing, knowing that he would never see him again. And these are some of Herman's stories, that he was able to build up a life here for himself. But every year he used to read the Kinnot in Belmont, sometimes in Hebrew, sometimes in English. And I always made sure that my children were in shul to hear Herman reading the Kinnot, because I said to them that when you're Herman's age, when you're in your 80s, you'll sit on Tisha B'Av with your children, and your children will read the Kinnot for the Shoah. Another 80 years, that's 150 years from the Shoah. And then when they're in their 80s, or your grandchildren are in their 80s, when you're in your 80s, I said to my children, your grandchildren will be little. And that'll be 150 years from the Shoah. And then when they're in their 80s, that'll be 230 years, 240 years from the Shoah. And they'll have little grandchildren. The Shoah will have happened a long time ago. It'll be ancient history. And they'll read it like we read the Kinnot Shali Srufa Va'esh, or the Kinnot for the York massacres. Something historical, but not really identifying with it. But your great-grandchildren will be able to say that they remember their grandparents telling them, that they remembered their grandparents saying that when they were little kids, they went to shul on Tisha B'Av, and the Kinnot for the Shoah was read by an old German Jew whose name they already don't remember. But he cried during that Kinnot because he remembered, as he read that Kinnot, his parents who were murdered in Auschwitz by the Nazis, Yishmach Shemam. And anybody who knows any survivors from the Shoah should make sure to talk to them, to make sure that your children know them. If you've got grandchildren, that your grandchildren know them. Because that's the way we keep something from turning into history and retain it as being real and live for as long as we possibly can. And that's something that Herman was able to do for me. Herman made me connected to his parents who died al Kiddush Hashem. And that is what this Kinnot is about. About 6 million Jews who died al Kiddush Hashem, who were murdered al Kiddush Hashem. Herman taught me many things. I think he says somewhere in this interview, he doesn't, as he was asked, he used to be asked that, do you hate Germans and can you forgive the Germans? I tell them no. Herman spent his retirement in Holocaust education till he had to give up driving about 5 or 6 years ago. Herman had more energy than I have some days. That he would spend hours driving, across the country, drive 3-4 hours to the south coast or something like that, speak in a school, telling them about the Shoah. That's several times, many times a year he would do this. Holocaust Memorial Day, he would be busy every single day. Tisha B'Av, he always fasted. I remember 1 or 2 occasions his wife was away, he broke his fast with us. He tells them, no, I don't hate Germans, only Nazis. That reconciliation with Germans is possible, but that I cannot forgive them for what they did to my parents. He doesn't hate people. He hates the people who harmed his parents. He doesn't hate others. And Today, I very much remember Herman and the friendship that I had with him, the support I had with him. That when I moved to Belmont, when I moved from Belmont, I remember that first Motzei Yom Kippur, that first Motzei Tisha B'Av, and then the first Motzei Yom Kippur. I came just before Tisha B'Av. Always used to walk home from shul on those key occasions with him. So we used to talk about how the day had been, and those were very meaningful times to me. And he was a very inspirational person. This Kinnot is on page 173 in the Rosenfeld edition, page 635 in the Koren Sachs. I'm going to try and read it the way Herman read it. Eicha tifarteinu meroshenu hishlachta, eicha panecha mimenu histarta, eicha katsafta v'lo chamalta. Belev nishbar v'nidker b'yom tzom v'atzara. Banu lefanecha lispod v'livkot b'kina u'vilala. V'zochreinu et kedoshei hashoah tartzat tasha. Gaon Yaakov asher ahavta shibarta. Gadata ramei hakoma v'hagvoim ishpalta. Gafneinu l'shama u'te'einatenu niktsafa samta. Davku atzamenu la'orenu v'sarenu. Dachot ikita la'aretz chayenu. Dalfa mituga v'anacha nafshenu. Hane'ehavim v'hane'imim ha'isharim v'hatmimim. Hutanu ba'kronot kivvasim v'karim. Hachom machanak v'apetachim chatumim. Vatikim yoshvim al ha'aretz domamim. Umehayta chatatam heim shoalim. V'lama nigzar hadin v'li rechamim. Zachor tizkor et zakat hanavim. Zakat hayatomim hagalmudim v'hanezavim. Zilzum chachamim v'talmidehem ha'ahuvim. Chayalim rashei beit avot giborim. Chalalim u'medukarim naflu milyonim. Cherpa u'mishama. Haytala goyim. Tipachnu v'ribinu ha'achzar kilam v'hashimam. Tarof tarfu kiz evim lishpoch damam. Tevach sheish meot ribo nizamam. Yardu chayim sha'ola b'shma Yisrael v'ani ma'amin. Yatsu nishmotehem mutarim b'talitu tfilin. Yevoshu v'yikalmu v'yu ka'ayin harotzchin. Kala she'ereinu ulvavenu al shever chelkeinu. Kulanu nosim kina ba'ovdan chatzi amenu. Ki shkula hashoah, ki sreifat beit Eloheinu. La Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Meidanek v'Treblinka. Lukchu v'hutchuku b'chadrei gaz, v'nisrafu b'mokdot ha'kivshanim b'cherpa. Lama lachamu hakdoshim hatorim v'naflu ki giborim b'geto Varsha. Mikol pina upina zoakim d'mehem ha'karushim. Matai yavo ketz lapgaim ha'anushim. Mispeid mar v'kina su'u al hakdoshim. Na'atsu hanoatzim et habrit ve'et toratenu. Naflu aleinu mechorfecha v'nivkeh v'atzom nafshenu. Nafala ateret roshenu, oina nachalatenu. Sifrei Torah ligzarim karu v'timu bidehem. Sarku b'sar she'ereinu v'oram hafku l'kishutehem. Siftu v'chigru sak v'helilu alehem v'altapehem. Einenu zolgot dam d'ma'ot. Al sreifat batei kenesiot. Al harisat yeshivot u'vatei midrashot. Parsuki lotenu v'harsu adatenu, pachad kiraanu ra'ada chazatnu, panenu kista kelima b'tzarotenu. Siya arku b'cheser v'chafan, tzunuot b'nafshan shalchu yadan, sa'aka b'yamsuf nishma kolan. Krovim v'didim chavivim chasidim v'isharim, kedoshim u'torim k'zohar akiyam azhirim. Kabaleim v'hasireim b'seite knafecha lo'olamim. Rachum zechor b'rachamecha tzridei nachalatecha. Ribon ha'olamim haser ta'agav v'tugame amecha. Rishat hagoyim v'sonei Yisrael ta'aker b'za'amecha. Shvuyim hadarer ufakach koach la'asureinu. Shemen sason tachat evel ta'atarenu. Shalom shalva tasim lanu la'artseinu. Tarim karnenu tachishku la'tenu bimhirav yamenu. Tagel aravav tifrach kachavat selet Yisrael medinatenu. Tvarachenu bebirkat Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov avotenu. And we continue, or we conclude now, with the final Kinai Litzion on page 176 in the Rosenfeld, 390 in the Art Scroll, and 611 in the Koren. Elitzion is actually, it's the final Kinah. That's the instructions here say the Kong rise and the reader ascends to his desk and chants the following. In actual fact, not everybody says that one should stand up for this. It's still a Kinah. Rav Soloveitchik makes the observation that this is reviewing everything that we've wailed for till now, and it's telling us that we're not over it yet. That the Avelut, the wailing, is never ending. That Kinnot can never be finished until the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt. We're not over it yet. We might be stopping because it's time to go home, but we're locked in here. That's this, emotionally, that's the sense of loss and the sense of desolation is always there. We might be getting up and going home because we can't lead our lives always sitting on the floor in mournful mode, but emotionally and inside us, that's the way we should be feeling till the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt. So we tend to sing the Elitzion as almost a triumphant march. Rav Soloveitchik made the observation that it's not really supposed to be sung like that. It's a kinai, it's a dirge. As we should be thinking about how we're still crying out and wailing to Hashem over the Churban Habayit. Elitzion va'areha kamo isha v'tzireha v'chivtu lach aguratzak al ba'al nureha alei armon asher nutash v'yashmat son adareha v'yal biat macharafayel b'toch mikdash chadareha alei galut mesharetayel ne'imei shir zamareha v'yal damam asher shupach kamo meimei yoreha alei hegyon mecholeha asher tamam ba'areha v'yal va'ad asher shameim uvitzul sanhedria alei zivchei tamideha ufidjonei b'choreha v'yal chilul kalei heichal u'mizbach ketoreha alei tapei malacheha b'nei David gevireha v'yal yofyam asher chashach beit saruch etareha alei kavod asher gala beit korban devireha v'yal lochetz asher lachatz v'sam sakim chagoreha alei machatz v'rov makot asher hukun zireha V'al niputzei le'sela, Ola lehana areha, Alei simchat mesaneha, V'soch kamal shvareha, V'yalinui v'nei chorin, Nediveha tohoreha, Alei fesha asher avata, Salol derech ashureha, V'yal tzivot kahaleha, Shezufeha shechoreha, Alei kolos mecharfeha, Beit Rabbi fegareha, V'yal rigshat megadefeha, B'toch mishkan chatzereha, Alei shimcha asher kulal, B'fi kamei metzareha, V'yal tachan yishavu lach, K'shavu shma mareha, Alei tzion v'yareha, Kamo isha v'tzireha, V'chivtu lach aguratzach, Al ba'al nureha. And we conclude with words of consolation. T'rachem tiyon kasher amarta t'chonena kasher dibarta, T'maher yishuav t'achishku lav t'ashuv Yerushalayim b'rachamim rabim, Kakatuv aliyanu yecha lachem ko amar Adonai shavti Yerushalayim b'rachamim, Beiti bane banu Adonai tzvaot v'kavi natel Yerushalayim, V'ne'ema od kura lemo ko amar Adonai tzvaot, Od tufutsen arai mitov nicham Adonai od et Zion v'acharos b'Yerushalayim, V'ne'ema ki necham Adonai Zion nicham kol chorvoteha, V'yasem mitbarak ke'eden v'arvata kegan Adonai, Sason v'simcha yimat seva, Toda v'kol zimra. This brings our presentation to an end. I thank everybody for joining us, and a reminder that there are many other meaningful presentations on the United Synagogue channel throughout the rest of the day.